Thanks, Bob. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Gary Trendle, Planning Board Chair. I hereby call our January 31st, 2022 meeting to order. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Planning Board is being conducted remotely, consistent with the recently signed an act extending certain COVID measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1st, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of the Governor's March 12, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The new law has two major parts. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of a public body, instead of holding meetings in a public place that is openly and physically accessible to the public. Second, the new law authorizes all members of a public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. For this meeting, the Planning Board is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the board's agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, the meeting is being broadcast by HCAM to multiple channels. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website via the web meeting calendar unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Just one reminder for items with public comments. After members have spoken, I will afford public comments. Please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and begin with your name and address. You will be afforded 3 minutes for questions and comments. And finally, each vote in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. So let's go ahead and just confirm who is here. So members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mary, are you here?
Yes, present.
Hi, Mary. Rob?
Hello.
Yep, Rob's here.
Fran?
Randy, I'm present.
Jane?
Yes, present.
Dave?
Dave Paul present.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman present.
Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan present.
And Ron?
Ron Pfeiffer present.
All right, and staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mr. Gelsich?
John Gelsich present.
Ms. Pemberton?
Stephanie Pemberton present.
And is Mr. Paradis on?
Phil Paradis with Beta present.
Oh, hi, Phil. There you are. All right. Well, let's get into it. We do have quite a few administrative things tonight, and we're just going to do a slight reorder. I thought what we would do is actually start with the 3 Chamberlain administrative items so that we can go ahead and get that off the plate and let those folks move on. Then we'll go through discussion around the floor area ratio request for the Chamber of Commerce. Actually, sorry, before we get to that, we'll get to the Turkey Ridge Estates Form E condition approval, the A&R for Fitch Ave, then we'll get to the floor area ratio discussion, the town meeting zoning articles, the laborers training center, and then we'll come back to the pedestrian connectivity survey discussion and the subdivision design standards discussion. Is that okay? So we're going to try and get the little ones out of the way for the applicants that are on. Then we'll get into the hearings that we have, and then we'll come back to the administrative items. So just to open up the public hearings, we'll start there. I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearings for the 5 town meeting zoning articles, as well as the major site plan review for the laborers training center.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Seconded.
Shahidul Manan second.
John, yes?
Just want to clarify that it's also for the stormwater management permit. For
Yes.
32nd Street.
Thank you. Mary, are you willing to amend your motion?
Yes.
And Sundar, are you willing to amend your second?
Yes.
On that?
As amended.
All right. So we no further discussion. We'll vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Pfeiffer, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. So we'll get to those in a little bit. At this point, I'm gonna actually hand it over to our Vice Chair, Mary Larson Marlowe, as I am going to recuse myself from the Chamberlain Street discussions. So,
Great.
Mary,
Thank you.
all yours.
Thanks, Gary. And I apologize to everyone. I have an unstable computer right now, so I'm calling in from my phone, and I've got the agenda up, but it's a little touch and go with me here. So, okay, so the first item related to Chamberlain Wayland is a land donation. John, could you walk us through what that is and what vote we need to take?
Sure. So the land donation is the open space that was promised as part of the subdivision approval. And it's going to be a donation to the town. So the town at town meeting actually has to accept the donation. So this is just to vote to add an article to the warrant for the land donation. There's no real discussion needed because we're just adding the article to the warrant. There's not going to be a hearing because this isn't a zoning article. So I guess
Okay.
if there is some conversation that needs to happen, this would be the time, but it's just kind of a formality at this point.
All right. Does anyone have any questions from the board?
Yes, Ron Prefer. The
ahead.
land donation itself, do we know where it exactly is and if there's significant upkeep required or anything like that?
We are aware of where it is because of it being in the plans that were approved.
Mhm.
So, and that has gone through some vetting in terms of the upkeep and who will manage it, but that would also be discussed at town meeting,
Wonderful.
before the vote is taken. Mhm.
Thank you.
And anyone else have any questions?
Mary,
Yes?
Mary to the chair, and maybe this is directed to John. Are there any conditions with us accepting this piece of donated property, John? I don't recall of anything through the discussions, but I just wanted to,
What do you mean by conditions?
any type of stipulation or anything that's attached to it.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know. Kathy Sherry might know a little bit better than me, but I don't believe so.
There's no conditions in that sense. I think the only thing that I might bring up is obviously as part of the open space plan, we had agreed to enhance and connect the trail system and add some boardwalks in, which that work has been completed within the open space and such. So that's really the only condition that I can think of or speak to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Through the chair, a clarifying question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Procedurally, do we always have to go with the town meeting for the donation, or it was something that could have been covered while we were reviewing the original proposal?
John, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so land donations have to go through town meeting unless they're done directly to the Conservation Commission. I think this one was, so if it goes to Conservation Commission would own the land aside from general town or, open space or something like that. So if you want it to go to anybody other than Conservation Commission, and even if it does go to Conservation Commission, there's nothing stopping them from going to town meeting, but it has to go to town meeting so that the town can accept it rather than the Concom.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to understand that. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, I would like to entertain a motion to add the Chamberlain Wayland land donation to the town meeting warrant.
So moved, Sundar Sivaraman.
Second, Ron
Childman,
Prefer.
second.
Thank you. And, okay, so we're gonna do the roll call vote. Sundar
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
and Fran,
Randy Young, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Jane,
Jane Moran, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Shahado,
Childman, yes.
and Ron,
Ron Prefer, yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is yes. All right. So on to the next item related to Chamberlain Wayland. The next item is Form E, Conditional Approval Agreement Amendment. So, John, I'm going to ask you to walk us through this one.
All right, I'm gonna share it so you guys can see it. So this is the conditional approval agreement is something that all subdivisions have to provide. It's basically saying, you know, we agree that the conditions are the conditions and that we're not going to ask for any releases of lots until we pay the bond. So this has to be amended because the original Form E was from the original decision. And then the amendment that we had to change the road layout a little bit like a year ago was not included. So the amended Form E had to include that new amended decision. So it's really just kind of a process issue. So they've submitted this. And now we just need to vote to endorse. And then after we vote to endorse this, then they are enabled to move forward with the Form K, because you can't do the Form K until you have this.
And you've gone ahead and reviewed this particular Form E, and it meets with your approval in terms of all of the items are in there that should be.
Yeah, it just references the decisions.
Yep.
And then, you know, the standard language.
Okay. And does anyone on the board have any questions about this?
So John, to the chair, no other changes then, other than just to address the modification to the road.
Correct.
That we did a year ago. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Hearing nothing else, then I will entertain a motion to endorse Form E for the Chamberlain Wayland development.
So moved, Shahid Manan.
Seconded, Sundar.
Thank you. And roll call. Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Jane,
Jane Marin, yes.
Fran,
Randy, Young, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Ron,
Ron Prefer, yes.
Shahudo,
Shahid Manan, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. And the last Chamberlain Wayland item is a Form K request for lot release. John, a quick summary?
Muted.
All right, so the
Okay.
Form K, you guys have all seen this before. This is to release the lots so that they can sell them. They are looking for all 29 lots to be released. The criteria that we usually require to be met for lots to be released is that they either complete the road or pay a bond. And at the last meeting, I believe it was the last meeting, we decided the bond amount. They submitted the bond. We have a copy of it. So that should be all good. So now we just need to take a vote to endorse the Form K.
And I have a quick question. Oftentimes when we were releasing lots, and you know, I could have some of this wrong, but you can correct me. But sometimes when we're releasing lots, there's something to do with the affordable unit amongst them. You know, like every 9th unit, there has to be the affordable made available. Can you clarify how it's working for this particular development?
So with the affordable units, they are usually based on the certificates of occupancy, not on the release. So they've gotten an amendment to the flexible community development bylaw so that they can make a payment rather than provide the units themselves. So they will just need to make a payment at the 10th C of O for each unit.
Got it.
Or for each 10th unit.
Yes, yeah. All right, thank you. Any other questions from members of the board? All right, then
Mary,
I will,
do have one question, Mary.
okay, go ahead.
And it's somewhat tangentially related. I'd like to kind of have a note that we as a board review the funds for affordable housing at a future date, in the not too distant future, because you know, given what the applicant will be contributing, that I think it's a worthy exercise to kind of review and just either make recommendations or is that fund being put to the best use possible at this time?
That's a great idea. So we have had some discussion of this when when the Affordable Housing Subcommittee presented to the board a little while ago. So we would bring that back up and discuss it further, specifically related to use of those funds. Great, thanks.
So through the chair,
Go ahead.
just to clarify, I'm a little confused as to what Fran is asking for. Are you looking to verify the amount that they're going to be paying each time?
No, it's a future, again, tangential to this, John, it's a future discussion on the amount of funds that are in the dollars that are in the fund itself. And then, the appropriate next steps or actions to review.
So I'll have to check, but I'm pretty sure the funds go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Yes, that's true. He's just talking about that trust fund.
Right, but the planning board doesn't have authority over the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board.
But we have recommendations we can make. That's all he's saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. He said review the funding, so I was a little concerned.
No.
Don't want to overstep. If
Okay.
everyone's on the same page but me, that's fine.
No, I think that clarification is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'd entertain a motion to endorse, is endorse the right word? Form K, request for lot release for the Chamberlain Wayland development.
Ron Pfeiffer, so moved.
And a second?
Sundar Subramanian seconded.
Okay, and voting on this, Ron,
Ron Pfeiffer, yes.
Fran,
Randy Young, yes.
Jane,
Jane Marin, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
and Shahidul.
Faisal Manan, yes.
Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. And this closes the Chamberlain Wayland portion. So I will turn it back over to Gary Trendle.
So
All right,
through the
thanks.
chair, before you turn it over to the original
Okay.
chair, I just want to remind everybody that these need to get signed by the planning board. So please come in because I have to notarize the signatures as well. So please come in tomorrow if you have a chance.
Okay.
Yep.
John, how many signatures do you need?
At least 5.
Okay, and just a clarifying question, am I allowed as a signature, given that I did not partake or vote in the discussion?
I believe so. I will check, and if you're not, I'll let you know, but there's going to be several things to sign, I'm assuming, so
I'll see you anyways. you know?
probably. There's an A&R coming up as well, so.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, thanks, Mary, and appreciate the efficiency there, everyone. So let's go ahead and move to the other Form E that we have, and this is for Turkey Ridge Estates. John, is there anything to talk through here? I think that's the same process as the other one, just that this is our first time seeing it as opposed to a revision. Is that correct?
Yes, so this is the Form E for Turkey Ridge versus Chamberlain, so it's going to have different decision referenced, and obviously different signatures, but essentially the same thing.
All right, any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to endorse the Form E for Turkey Ridge Estates.
Ron Pfeiffer, so
Mary-
moved.
Sorry, Mary Larson Marlowe, second.
All right, assuming no further discussion, we will go ahead and vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahidul?
Faisal Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Pfeiffer, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. All right, let's move to the A&R on Fitch Avenue. Do we have the applicant on here? See Mr.
Representing
Truax.
the applicant, Mr. Chairman, Rob Truax with GLM Engineering Consultants.
Hi, Rob.
How
How
are
are
we
you?
doing tonight? Good, thank you.
Good. Do you want to just quickly explain to us why you are here in front of the planning board?
Yeah, it's really just to adjust some lot lines on the existing lots on lots 43 through 46 at the request of the developer. So you can see on the plan where the old lot lines were, it's not much of a change. So it's really just some minor adjustments of lot lines to his request.
All right, just out of curiosity, any particular reason that you can share as to why the adjustment?
I think if you zoom out a little on the plan, as you get down towards lot 43, there's some wetlands there over on the other side of that Adam Street. And I think the idea was you wanted to keep the house as far away as possible. See the wetland that comes up where it says Adam, that dash line down in the bottom left corner, where it's right where it says Adam, you see a little dash line. That's the wetland area. So the idea was just to get the house as far away as you possibly could on that last lot.
Got it. So he's just shifting everything a little bit to the right.
Correct.
Thank you. Super helpful. Any questions or comments from the board? All right, then seeing none, I will entertain a motion to endorse the A&R for Fitch Ave lots 43, 44, 45, and 46.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Edelman, second.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Fran, did you have a question?
No, I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank
Good.
you.
Okay. Sorry, when we go to when John shares the screen, I can see some people, but not everybody. So hence the reason for the little pause there. All right, let's go ahead and vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Edelman, yes.
Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes. So thank you, Mr. Truax. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much. Have a good night.
All right, let's go to the request to increase the floor area ratio in industrial A districts from 50 to 80%. And so just to remind everybody, this at this point is a request that is coming from the Chamber of Commerce, and they're asking that we add this to the town meeting warrant. So this is not a public hearing for this one. It's simply a vote as to whether or not we would add this to the town meeting warrant. That town meeting warrant is due tomorrow, so we need to make a decision, go or no go tonight, regardless of how people feel about this. And I saw Mr. Ostrander on the line. Do you want to quickly explain to us the actually? Sorry,
I have a comment.
Yeah, sure. Actually,
I'm sorry.
before we get to you, Mr. Ostrander, let's just go ahead, Mary.
I think this is a great suggestion, but I do think that it's more appropriate to take it to Zach first, so it can be discussed in full there, and then be brought forward from them to the planning board for the town meeting next year.
Thanks, Mary. So to the planning board, thoughts on that?
Through the Gary, this is Rob. Through the chair, I totally agree. I think the day before the warrant closes, first time considering this, or when getting the meeting packet, first time considering it. I don't think it's gone through the proper vetting where people can weigh in whether they like this proposal, that live in town, or don't like this proposal. I have my own opinions, but we haven't had any kind of dialogue about this proposal
And
up till now.
I should say, just to clarify, even if we did add it to the warrant, we would still have a public hearing and we could remove that article at a later point in time. So this is not meant to force the conversation tonight. This is just a question of whether we want to put a placeholder in the town meeting warrant for this article and then address it through a hearing process with more discussion later on. So I personally, I tend to agree with Mary. We have a well-established process through Zach, and I generally support that, but just kind of want to get people's thoughts on it. John, you just saw you raise your hand.
So something else to consider, and I don't know if this is going to change any planning board members' minds, but we would need to advertise. And so we've advertised all the hearings for this meeting, and we did it all in one advertisement. With this, we'd have to do a whole separate notification, whole separate a butter notification, advertisement in the newspaper, that kind of a thing. So that's something the town would have to pay for. So I don't know if that factors in, if the proponent from the Chamber of Commerce would be willing to fund that notification if they feel strongly about getting it on the town meeting warrant for this meeting, or if it was on the next one, obviously it would be included with all the other hearings, but something to consider.
So let me, I'm going to get to Mr. Ostrander in a second because I want to give him a chance to comment, but we'll get through the board members first. And I see Ron, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just again, we're seeing this. I'd like to have some rationale as to why this proposal is coming forward.
Yep.
I can't weigh in my pro or my feeling towards unless I know the rationale behind it.
Yep. Okay. So, Mr. Ostrander, thanks for your patience, and sorry to start you up there and then cut you off. But I guess a couple of quick questions for you as you explain this, and I think you outlined it nicely in your letter, so I appreciate that. But I guess two questions from me in particular. Is there a reason that you have to not follow our established ZAC process? AKA, is there some urgency around this or something that would justify us deviating from our established process? I guess that's the first question, and then and maybe we'll start there. But a little bit of background on it, and like I said, in particular, I'm curious if there's a rationale to accelerate and deviate from our process.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having us and for taking this. So the chamber had made an original recommendation to change the parking area ratios, and these kind of go hand in hand together. So I'm sure all of you reviewed this, but none of this floor area ratio and changes really have anything to do with anything other than industrial zone buildings, which is pretty much all of South Street. So this doesn't have to do with my little condo or a gas station or anything like this. And this is primarily for two-story industrial zones. And the reason we would like to try and get this added into a warrant, and again, it could be discussed throughout the next several months, is to go with the parking area ratio, which will limit the required amount of parking that's needed, because these industrial zone buildings are not needing as many skilled laborers to work them, but the machines that are needed for them are very large, take up a large footprint in these buildings, and where you maybe would have, 50, 60 years ago, 10 people shoulder to shoulder soldering and putting these widgets and gadgets together. Now you have one person manning these massive machines that will take up large amounts of space. So as development of South Street is continuing and we're seeing new companies come into the area and we want to attract them, we would like to try and just get this hopefully approved as quickly as possible versus waiting another, possibly 18 months at this point if we waited until 2023. We do understand there is, the established zoning advisory committee. We have members on our economic development committee that's a part of the Chamber of Commerce who are well known to many members of this board. So I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding that, but who have all supported this, developers in town. We just know it's very important to be able to be competitive compared to other towns. And if you look at the recommendation we had made, we gave a.
Paul, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but what I don't want to do today is get into a debate about the actual article itself.
Okay.
Because it's not a hearing, so we're not meant to discuss that, and we'd have to repeat anything if we did have another public hearing for it. But to me, what I want to focus on is that rationale to put this on for us to vote to put this on the town meeting warrant tonight. And it sounds like the primary rationale is that it goes hand in hand with the parking adjustments, which we're also going to be discussing and potentially moving through as an article. Is that fair assumption?
To keep it simple, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks. And like I said, good discussion to have, and I think your thoughts are well laid out. I don't want to get everybody into a
That's
debate
fine.
about
Yep.
the
You're
content.
nail on the head there. Yep, that goes hand in hand. Correct.
Okay.
Then did you have a second question?
I guess my second question is just with regards to John's thoughts. And John, is there a ballpark cost as to what it costs to advertise? And just want to throw that information out there if people were to consider.
There is, but I don't know what it is. I'd have to ask Kobe. She would know, unless Steph knows.
Unfortunately, I don't know. I think, isn't it based on how many words and? Yeah.
It's going to be like a couple $100.
Okay. Okay. All right. Other questions or comments from the board?
Through the chair, a quick clarifying question. I think given the rationale, certainly the economic development is on the focus, and we're not going to discuss the merit tonight. But procedurally, should we decide to vote on it, is there any process that we could, before the town meeting, also request Zach or put it in front of Zach to get their discussion on this, as my colleagues are opening that up? And I think that's a very good point. Procedurally, Zach should have been involved.
Yeah, I think that procedurally we could certainly ask Zach to weigh in on it, particularly if they're meeting at some point. I'm going to defer to our liaison, Mary, on that question, though.
So, yeah, I could see it taking place one of two ways. One is just us referring it to Zach, and Zach doing the due diligence that they normally do sometime over the next year, and having it for the 2023 town meeting. So the other way is if we ask Zach to review it really rapidly over the next several meetings, and then come back to planning board with a recommendation at the time that planning board is having the public hearing. So it is kind of truncating the whole process, but it is possible. I can't speak for the chair of the ZAC, Curtis, but that is a possible alternative.
Okay. So if we were to move forward that pathway, then Zach could come back with modifications. They could come back with some recommendations, do something different. They could come back and say, we're not comfortable with it at this point. They could generally provide a recommendation to us, and then we could always, through the public hearing process, we could vote to remove it from the town meeting warrant. We could also vote to modify it based on Zach's input. Or we could vote to move it forward as is based on Zach's recommendation. The only thing that we're hinging on there. Yes, John.
So I would caution if you do add it to the warrant, Zach recommends changes, you can't really substantially change the language in the proposed text. So you could probably change like 80% to 60% or 70%, but like you wouldn't be able to add different dimensional characteristics that you would then want to change along with it.
Got it.
But through you, Mr. Chair, we could remove it, right, as an option.
Yes,
we can always
the article altogether.
Yeah, we can always remove it.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Dave.
I feel like I don't want to tie these guys up for the next year or longer. So even though it's not our normal process, my suggestion is to ask Zach to fast track it. And if we don't feel comfortable with it, then we can remove it.
All right, so I think we're probably ready to take a vote on this. Are there any other comments before we do? Jane?
Through the chair to Mary. Is it your opinion that you would have enough time to do this? Do you feel comfortable asking, or do you think Zach would feel comfortable?
I think that this seems like it isn't terribly complicated, terribly, and that the chamber has provided some data. And at, the worst case scenario of asking Zach to fast track it is that Zach comes back and says, we did not have time to properly vet this, and so we ask that it be removed until next year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, John.
So before the board takes a vote, I just want to, through the chair, confirm with Mr. Ostrander that the text that's on the screen right now is what they are looking for.
Yes.
No additional changes, no other sections of that article. This is it's just the maximum gross floor area that you're looking to change. Okay.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a really quick question, not to get into details, if I may, but does this affect all zoning?
Only industrial A.
Okay, got it in the title. Thank you. Didn't see that small print.
All right, let's go to take a vote.
Gary, can I make
yes.
one more comment?
Sure. Up.
Looking, so I know we don't want to discuss it, but looking at industrial A, all parcels have, for all intents and purposes, have structures, have buildings. I guess I don't know what I don't know. Like, changing this is obviously changing. Like, if it was to pass a town meeting and put it on the warrant, it would change zoning. But I don't know that it's going to have any real world effect. This would be my initial reaction.
Yeah, maybe not. We'll certainly get in the hearing process. The one caveat I'd say is that, from my understanding from the letter, is that this has a larger effect on two-story buildings, because the one-story footprint doesn't change, but with a second story, it allows them to build out a little bit more. So if something were to be renovated or remodeled or something like that, then that could have some effect on it. All right, so let's go ahead and I will entertain a motion to add an article to the town meeting warrant to increase to amend Article 8, Section 210-28, as referenced in the meeting packet, to increase the floor area ratio from 50% to 80%.
So
moved.
All right, it's Mary with the motion and Sudar with the second. Any further discussion?
Through the chair, just one clarification point. Did the applicant agree to fund the newspaper advertisement? Did he say yes to that? Just want to clarify that.
Mr. Ostrander, do you have a position on that?
Yeah, we can obviously assist with the funding, whether it's the chamber or me personally. That shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. John.
Mr. Chair.
Just a clarification. You said maximum floor area ratio. That's actually a different dimensional requirement that's not being changed. The maximum gross floor area is what's being changed.
I'm sorry. I was reading the agenda where it references floor area ratio. So Mary and Sundar, are you comfortable revising that amendment to only reference the maximum gross floor area?
Mary Larson Arlo, yes, this is so revised. I accept that amendment.
And Sundar Sivaraman seconds the amendment.
And Dave, you had another question?
Yeah, just a quick comment for when the ZAC does take it. I would like to suggest, Mary, that they look at somehow just looking at the gross area of the first floor, because it doesn't seem to make sense that if you have a 3-story, 4-story building, how you're comparing that to the size of the lot.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay. And then one more question for Mary and Sundar, since it's their motion. And second, do you also want to request that the Chamber of Commerce fund the posting expenses related to adding another hearing?
Yes, and I will add that to the amendment, or I don't know if we're putting that in the motion itself.
John, what do we need to do to formalize that as part of the vote?
Amend the motion so to acknowledge that the Chamber of Commerce will pay the notification and advertising fees.
Okay. Mary Larson Marlowe, I accept that.
Sundar Sivaraman, I second that.
Okay. I think we're ready to vote. Mary, we'll start with you.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran Dion, yes.
Jane?
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Faisal Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes as well. So thank you, Paul. Appreciate you working that through with us. Helpful discussion. And
for your time.
we'll go ahead and work with Town Hall to get that posted, and we can get that hearing scheduled.
Yep, great. Thank you very much.
Sundar, did you have a question?
No, sorry, nothing. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's move to the town meeting zoning articles, of which we do have a scheduled hearing tonight. We have 5 of them. I think these are all relatively straightforward. I guess, John, a quick process question for you. And I've gotten myself in trouble with this in the past, thinking these are going to be straightforward, but I wonder if you have any recommendation as to whether we can just quickly go through all of these, ask our questions, have a discussion, ask for public input, and then vote on them together, or if you think that it's worth going through them individually and voting individually.
You may not like my answer. I think it's probably going to be better to go through individually and take a vote on each one individually, just in case somebody has comments. You're not holding up all of them for one of them.
I'm fine with that. Just wanted to check, and we've gotten a lot faster at voting in the last couple of months, so hopefully we'll be quick. And Mary is going to help us out with these as our ZAC liaison. So we'll start with the dimensional table. Mary, do you want to describe the rationale for the proposed change?
Sure. So the dimensional table is simply a visual representation of what is in the zoning bylaws. And it gives dimensions like setback and side, rear clearance and things like that for all of the different zones in our bylaws. So essentially it is simply to add quick reference for everyone looking at the bylaws. And there's also, a column that refers to the actual bylaw that this comes from, each line. So it's simply to help people read through the zoning and find information quickly. That's all it is.
Super helpful, Mary. I love it. And anybody that's gone through to try to look for some of the stuff in the past, table seems very helpful to me.
Peter, I had the same, so I love it.
Questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? All right, so it sounds like we are ready to take a vote. And John, I always get this mixed up. What's the right verb here that we're voting on? Is this, are we recommending? What's the right language for the motion?
So the board is voting to recommend that town meeting approve the article.
Okay. Got it. So I will entertain a motion that the planning board recommend town meeting approve this article, being a addition of a dimensional table shown as Appendix A.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Kaiserman and second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Kaiserman and yes.
Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. Motion carries. Second one, Mary, housekeeping and plural uses.
I'm gonna give it to John since it came out of his house.
John, you want to quickly explain to us?
Sure. So plural uses. So as we were going through the bylaw to make a different change, we noticed that some uses were listed singular, some of them were plural, and it did not make any sense as to why that was done. It created confusion saying that, particularly the reason why we made this change was single family dwellings. Well, none of the articles that we're going to have before us is to allow for one single family dwelling. Sorry, Sundar, I think yours is a little feedback.
Oh,
I can hear myself. There we go. Thank you. So this created confusion to one argument could be made that it allows for multiple single family dwellings. So we are changing all of the uses to singular uses. In certain situations, there's other grammatical changes to make that happen. And then I will point out if I can find it. So in like the industrial districts, you have the manufacturing is a singular use here, but these are going to be plural because those are not the use itself. They're just the types of things that are manufacturing. So that's the only, I would say, it's not really an inconsistency, but the only one that may raise questions as to why it wasn't changed, because the use itself is in manufacturing, not the products that it's making. Everything else should be changed to singular throughout.
So John, really just grammatic cleanup and housekeeping here.
Correct. And yeah, these had to be renumbered. And that's basically it.
All right. Any questions or comments from the board?
Other than to say, I think Zach supported this unanimously, so.
Good point. Thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
Any questions or comments from the public? All right, then I think we're ready for a vote on this one. So I will entertain a motion to recommend that the town meeting approve this article for housekeeping and cleanup of plural uses.
So planning board recommends that town meeting approve it.
Yes.
And so moved, Mary Larson Marlowe.
Randy on second.
All right, assuming no further discussion, we'll go ahead and vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Kaiserman and yes.
Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
And Gary Trendle is a yes. Motion carries. This next one, and I think this relates to something John was just describing. So, but this is related to The proposed town meeting article would insert language at the beginning of the bylaws specifying that only one single-family house home is allowed per lot. Additionally, the definition of principal use would be inserted into the definitions section. So hopefully this is clear to folks, but if it's a single-family dwelling, then it makes sense that there can only be one dwelling on that lot. John, anything else to add? Or Mary, or Sundar for that matter. I know Sundar, you're on Zach as well.
Through the chair, nothing else to add.
For the board, any questions or comments?
And we thank the land use office staff for finding these items to clean up our zoning bylaws.
And Mary, how did Zach vote on this one?
Unanimous
Unanimous.
to recommend.
All right, any questions or comments from the public?
One question.
Yes,
through the
Brandon.
chair, Is, had this in the past been construed any other way than the way it's written here, John and Mary?
No, that's the good part. Nobody's ever interpreted it or tried to use it against us.
So no one has officially tried to use it, but there has been in the recent months a landowner who mentioned it being a possibility as a foregone conclusion. We were like, I don't think that's how it's worded, but maybe we should check it. And then we realized that it could be misinterpreted in that way.
Oof.
Thank you.
All right, so I will entertain a motion that the planning board recommend town meeting approve this these changes to Article 1, General Provisions, Section 210-3, and Article 1, General Provisions, Section 210.-4, as described in the meeting packet.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Sundar seconded.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, we will go ahead and vote. Mary?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Raidul Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Prefer, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes. That motion carries. Next one is the proposed town meeting article would separate laboratory research and development and industrial uses into a new parking use category. Set the ratio for this category as one parking spot space per 800 square feet of gross floor area. Reduce the parking ratio for warehouse uses from one space per 1,000 square feet gross floor area to one space per 2,000 square feet gross floor area, and make consistent the reference of the term space in several categories. An example, the last modification would be changing one per 3 dogs to one space per 3 dogs. Creative example, John. Mary, do you want to?
Sure.
Oh, that is actually in there. I apologize. I was thinking that was meant in another way, but.
But it is cute. Okay, so this was recommended by the chamber, and we thank them for that. This is I think this is very much needed, and the Zach did have a chance to go through this in quite a lot of detail, including again provided by the chamber some very good data from surrounding towns and some more distant towns, but those with a fair amount of research and development, biotech type of uses within their towns as well. And for one thing, we were all wanting to reduce the required parking spaces such that, first of all, we don't want excess asphalt, if there's if you it's better to have some green space and trees rather than asphalt if you don't need the asphalt. And the general feeling is that for the industrial uses and business uses, accepting downtown, which is a whole different matter entirely, but say on South Street, that there is ample parking for most businesses, and it is in the interest of a building owner to have enough spaces to rent out the facility, and make sure that they have enough parking for the people who are going to be using that and for the business that's going to be acquiring it or renting there. So it is certainly in their best interest to have appropriate amount of parking, and we really shouldn't be dictating a great deal more parking than is required. The previous bylaw was written primarily with office space in mind rather than research and development, and really there aren't as many people in a warehouse, in a manufacturing unit, or in R&D, in an R&D lab, than there are if it's a straight office building. And so this is what we tried to do to bring it back down to where it should be, and made it comparable to other towns with whom we compete for development, industrial development. So like Westboro and a lot of other towns like that.
So two questions for you, Mary. Actually, one question for you, Mary, and one for John. So do you want to show us the comparison to other towns? Or can you speak to that?
John?
I would have to dig into the files to find that, so it might take me a little bit.
Okay. I know that at least even in the letter that the chamber provided, it was super useful just to see the other towns and what their requirements were. I would be curious to see how this compares. I feel like I remember that being part of the ZAC discussion, but and then my second question, just to clarify, so if these changes were to go through and a building was built to meet these specifications, and at some point they needed to add parking spots, then what would the necessary process be for the landowner to increase the parking area and the number of parking spots? I guess that's a question for John. Now I'm making you talk and look at the same time, so I apologize.
So one more time with the question, because I just found the file, but now I wasn't paying attention to the question
All right,
itself.
why don't you show the file first? Well, there we go.
So Ashland, Grafton, Bedford, Framingham. I know Westboro was on there. Lexington, which is a good R&D space to review. Milford, Burlington, Waltham, Marlboro. No, Westboro. I was sure there was Westboro.
Mary, just out of curiosity, how were these particular towns selected? Because some of them are close by, like Milford and Framingham, Ashland, but others seem somewhat random.
The ones that were not in the nearby area were chosen either because they had strong R&D focused businesses, or else they were similar in size to Hopkinton. So the criterion were either nearby or similar size or the R&D piece.
Okay. And do you want to just quickly explain to us what the changes are here?
Okay, so obviously every town did it slightly differently in terms of calculations. Sometimes they had slightly different categories than we did. But what they did was we calculated it such that it made it spaces per 1,000. And he just moved the spaces per 1,000.
Isn't it spaces per 800 square feet?
It was.
Yeah, so through the chair, Mary, if you don't mind me.
Go
jumping.
ahead.
So what they did is they took this research and development industrial uses, made it into a laboratory research and development industrial uses category. So that was previously 3 spaces per 1,000, and then changed it to 1 space per 800. And then in warehouse uses, change it from 1 space for 1,000 to 1 space per 2,000. So effectively having the requirement.
So those are the only 2 changes that we made to our overall parking requirements.
Okay. So can we
So
go
even
to
though there's lots
go
of
to the other
highlighting,
table?
those are the only changes.
So we go to the other table, just in those 2 categories. One being warehouse, where we're proposing 1 space per 2,000 square feet. Which we can see Ashland is 2 per
So
1,000.
Ashland had 2, and this is per. See, I'm sorry. Can you scroll to the right? See, average per 1,000. Okay, that in the yellow. So they did average per 1,000. So that's what they did, since every town calculated it slightly differently. So we had to recalculate it according to per 1,000 square feet. Okay.
Okay.
And then that's the average, but we didn't necessarily go with the averages. We just, we looked at some of the recommendations for us moving forward.
So sorry, maybe I'm missing something here, but on the chamber recommendation here, it seems like they're proposing 2 spots per 1,000 square feet. But if I go back to the notes, I think it says 1 spot per 2,000 square feet. Oh no, maybe I'm wrong. Oh, I see. Okay. So that's
1 per 800 is 0.83 per 1,000.
okay, but that was for warehouse, and the warehouse was a higher threshold, wasn't it?
And we did not go straight with the chamber's recommendation. Zach went ahead and made it even less for a warehouse.
Okay.
Less required parking for a warehouse.
Through the chair, one of the discussion points that Zach had at their meeting was, why do we even need parking minimums? Because developers are going to create the amount of parking that they believe that their employees need. So there was a sentiment at Zach to go farther than what the chamber recommended, because it was kind of a balance between removing the parking minimum and doing what the chamber said. Because if you look at the industrial district, which a lot of these will apply to, they're going to create the parking that they need for their use.
I look forward to when developers always build what's needed.
In this situation, though, the argument was, if they're going to have a laboratory or a warehouse, they're going to need to provide parking for their employees. Otherwise, where are they going to park, especially in the industrial district? So there's an incentive for developers to actually provide enough parking in these types of developments, rather than a downtown business where they could argue, oh, well, go park on the street or go park in a public lot. There aren't those options in the industrial district. And that's why the Zach thought it was more appropriate to do a lower ratio here than elsewhere in town.
Yeah. So the average of the comparison towns for warehouse was 1.17, and then for R&D, which one is it? Just want to write these down. Oh, so R&D is that column there, is that the recommendation?
R&D was the second line down, and life sciences labs the third line down. So
Okay.
1.25 and 2. They had for R&D versus and life sciences labs. Now we didn't differentiate those because R&D versus life science, R&D high tech versus life science, also R&D. You know, they're too similar to really put in separate categories for something as simplistic as parking. So.
Through the chair, I had a clarifying question whenever the right time is.
Yes, please, go ahead, Shahidul. I think I've confused everybody enough here, so I'm gonna shut up for a little while.
No, thank you. Quick question, Mary. So for office workers, the other towns are at 4 or 5, and we are at 3. Has there been any discussion to increase that and be at par? And also when we apply the kind of philosophy behind it, as John mentioned, not to have the workers or employees park on the public streets because they don't have enough parking. What did you?
Okay, so first of all, I'm looking at this more of a standpoint of this is for the items that we were considering changing, which was R&D and industrial manufacturing. Those are in an industrial A and B, and those areas do not have street parking. So the parking lots that are created or already in existence on these developed lots are where the employees park. There is no incentive for a developer or an employer to have too little parking. So it is, my personal opinion is that we really shouldn't have parking minimums for those types of areas, because you know, everyone is incentivized to create the appropriate parking for the building that they're building. You know, decent amount of parking for the employees that are going to be parked there are needed there. You know, we should think about minimum parking, because I don't think we should have big parking lots that are not being used. I mean, I think that's bad for the environment and bad aesthetically. So, so I'd like to turn it around a little bit and not think about putting in minimum parking requirements, and rather think about, let's try to get less parking, less parking lots. Only have
So
what's
Dawn-
necessary.
John, I'm gonna go to my second question. And let's just say that someone builds out a building and they go with this minimum number of spots. And then let's just say that they change tenants or they change businesses or something like that, and they want to add more parking spots. What process would the applicant need to follow in order to add parking spots?
Site plan review.
Site plan review.
And
They'd be altering a parking area, presumably more than 25 spaces. So it would probably be a major site plan, or if it's 5 spaces, it would be a minor site plan. But that's how they would do that.
So similar to, we did that for Cornell's maybe a year and a half ago, I think.
Correct.
Okay.
Through the chair, what would happen to the mixed business buildings? And I also have a little comment on Mary's answer. I think I totally agree that we want to save the green, but we also don't want to. I mean, I was just noticing that you mentioned we are taking precedence or kind of learning from the other towns. That was the reason for the question. And then we don't want to overcrowd the public streets either. But I understand. I mean, I think there's a balance and something of a minimum that may not have a huge impact on the overall parking. But if all the other towns are doing 4 and 5, I was just wondering if that would be a good reference point or not. But the other question, sorry, I mixed up a few questions and comments. The other question earlier was, John, how would we go about if there's a mixed business use of the building?
So for mixed use buildings, they need to comply with the parking ratios for the uses. So like if it's 50-50 office and warehouse, they would have to do, the square footage that's warehouse complying with the warehouse parking requirements, and then the square footage that's the office would have to comply with the office parking. If that changes, they're still going to be held to the standard ratios for that particular use. So if it's half commercial or half research and development and half warehouse, and then it eventually goes to all research and development, they're going to have to comply with the parking requirements for, the square footage under research and development. They're not going to be able to just move in with the same parking. If they're right at the line, they're not going to be able to move in full research and development with the warehouse parking ratio.
Makes sense. Thank you.
To the chair for a moment, with that scenario in place that you just mentioned, would that not therefore potentially leave a building completely abandoned if we're pigeonholing them that it must warehouse, therefore it must be another warehouse, versus allowing for some modifications, because they can't all of a sudden just tear down half the building?
I don't quite understand the question.
Ron, they can still, within industrial A, they can still change the use of that building.
But again, if we have different ratios between a warehouse and a research facility, then if those ratios therefore may put into a situation where there's not enough parking.
Correct. And that's where they'd have to go through a site plan review to add more parking if they were changing the use to one that required more parking.
Which may not be allowed because the footprint won't allow more parking. That means they may not use that facility and go somewhere else. That's my concern, is that we have a place that was designated warehouse because the parking was warehouse, therefore it must always be warehouse, and therefore not allow potential modification of its use if it's restricted on square footage of the parking versus the building.
So through the chair, there's really two kind of answers to that. The first is there is a provision that the planning board can reduce the amount of parking that's required. The second is it's very unlikely that this hypothetical use is going to build out the entire square footage of the property so that they would have literally no room to add parking. I mean, if you look at the size of the parking lots currently, there's usually an excess of required parking because the ratios are lower than what they've provided. So if you have, they probably wouldn't meet another dimensional restriction if they built the site out to the level that you're using in your example, where they would then not have enough room to put more parking. They'd probably be compliant on another requirement. Lot coverage, for example, that's not changing. So in the industrial A, lot coverage, I think, is like 40% of the site.
Okay.
Please, Mr. Chair, can I make a quick suggestion?
We're not like, so appreciate it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dave.
I think we're getting into this way too deep. In the past, we've talked about trusting Zach and the work that they've done. So I'd like to say that we just approve this recommendation and move on. Just a suggestion.
So do you want to make a motion?
Sure. Yeah, I motion. Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, I'll make a motion to recommend approval for this on the town at the town meeting.
Eisenman, second.
All right. Any further discussion? Yes, Fran.
Yes, to the chair. Mr. Chairman, maybe this goes back to Mary, but is there a particular situation or instance that's driving these recommended changes, or is this something that we're just trying to be proactive on and get ahead of something? What things?
There is the sense that our parking requirements were outdated in terms of not recognizing R&D life sciences labs for the, the number of workers per square foot, and kind of lumping them in with office and or manufacturing and industrial. And so, yes, so as far as there being a very specific example of, a particular business that went elsewhere, probably not. I can't say that there's anybody citing a specific example that way. But in the real estate and the chamber word of mouth more than anything else is that, some of our requirements were out of date and out of sync with attracting biotech, life science. So
Thank you.
so more of a sense of it rather than specifics. Yeah.
And I think it's fair also to note as we're constantly trying to reduce impermeable surfaces, then if we can reduce the asphalt on a site, that's also a good thing, which I think is worth noting. Yes, John.
So through the chair, Mary is not privy to this information, and it's not really connected, but I know that there have been discussions in the past in the land use department with the zoning enforcement officer and some developers on South Street about enlarging certain buildings, but then not being able to meet the parking requirements because those parking requirements are excessive and then would therefore require parking that they don't need. So then they had to go different routes to figure out how to accommodate the expansion of their business that they wanted to do. I'm sure that got communicated to the Chamber of Commerce, so there's no direct link between the conversations we had at the land use department and this now newly proposed zoning change, but I would assume they are somewhat associated with each other. And there's others probably on South Street that have the same concern.
It's great perspective.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Any further discussion? So I think we are ready for a vote. We'll start with Mary.
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Sorry, Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Draper, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes. Motion carries, and thanks, Dave, for moving the question. Appreciate that. All right, last one is another housekeeping one to make some changes to use gender neutral terms. I think that this probably explains itself when you look at it. It's just removing terms that are gender specific so that our zoning articles read in a gender neutral fashion.
Yep.
Any questions or comments from the board or from the public for that matter?
No.
Through the chair, makes
Yes.
sense, and I'm glad someone is reviewing these and coming up with these recommendations.
All right. So I will entertain a motion for the planning board to recommend town meeting approve this housekeeping article to use gender neutral terms throughout our bylaws.
Mary Larson Marlowe, so moved.
Sundar seconded.
All right. Any further discussion? Yes, John.
Through the chair, I just want anybody who's listening to know that this is also going to be done for the general bylaws.
Great. Thanks, John. No further discussion. We'll go to the vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Shahidul Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Draper, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes as well. All right, so we've got 5 zoning articles plus potentially one more, depending on a future hearing. John, do we need to, I guess we need to vote to close this public hearing, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing for the 5 town meeting zoning articles referenced in the meeting packet.
So moved. Mary Larson Marlowe.
Kyle Mann second.
All right, assuming no further discussion, Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob,
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran,
Randy Young, yes.
Jane,
Jane Marin, yes.
Dave,
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahadul,
Kyle Mann, yes.
Ron,
Ron Paper, yes.
and Gary Trindle's a yes. And special thanks to Zach. I know this stuff gets tricky and in the weeds, and appreciate that committee moving forward with some things that seem reasonably clear cut. So appreciate all the work from Zach on these articles. Okay, let's move to the Labor's Training Center. And I see a few names on here that we can probably unmute. Who's going to be speaking on behalf of the applicant?
I'm Vito Colonna with Cornerstone Engineering. George Connors is going to be making most of the presentation. I see him just logging on.
Okay.
Right now. I think he's just getting the microphone set up, it looks like.
Okay.
1 second.
Well, really quickly, I'm hopeful this is reasonably straightforward. We have 30 minutes allotted to this tonight. And we did just get Beta's review, I guess at the tail end of the week. But what I'd like to do tonight is if we can get through the project introduction from you, and then we can get through the staff report and Beta's initial comments. And then I don't think we want to talk about a potential site walk, although I realize it might be a little snowy out there right now. And we'll see where we're at time-wise. But given the late review from Beta, I think we're likely gonna extend this to another meeting, but I still want to make sure to use that 30 minutes that we have allotted in a useful fashion tonight. So George, it sounds like do you want to walk us through the initial introduction and tell us a little bit about what you intend to do on the site? George, we can't hear you. I see you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Still can't hear you, George.
You may want to hit that little triangle beside the mute button and choose your microphone.
I think he just dropped off. Maybe he's going to call back in.
You drop off.
And I will say as well that I know that there may be a handful of members from the public here, so we will also make sure to save a little bit of time for you to provide your initial thoughts. We appreciate you calling in.
All right.
Are we there now?
Yes. Hi, George.
I'm a computer Luddite. So I'm George Connors. I'm an attorney representing the laborers for many years. They have a project out on 37 East Street, their campus. Vito Colonna is a design engineer on the project from Cornerstone. And we have John Racine, one of the architects working on the project for the laborers. The laborers have had a campus of about 135 acres out on East Street, Clinton Street, and Front Street, along with access from Laurel Canyon. They've had a major building out front called the Dormitory building. Here front, Vito's got it coming up now. That has been their principal operation area at the very beginning. In the back of the site, there is a Maloney building, which is another building up on the top of the hill. You can see it up there. That has been an expansion probably 20 years or so ago, and that helps them train. There's a couple of small outbuildings there as well. Then in the middle of the site is the pond, and there's the administrative building there and a large conference room. And at this particular point in time, the facilities have become overcrowded from the training programs. There is no increase in population on this site. It is simply a expansion for the training programs that go on there. They become much more complex, involving hazardous waste, involving confined space and gas and manhole type things. So they're expanding the buildings in several areas. The first is for the dormitory. And if you can go to that large drawing, the dormitory is currently serving the facility. There are 33 double occupancy rooms in the dormitory. They're converting those to single occupancy for some, I think it's 45 units to update it. In addition, the project will have an expanded and renovated kitchen. That's the proposed addition on the right side you see there. So basically the building is being expanded in two locations, one towards the street for those dormitories, and that's enclosing the entrance area. That's going to be a more formalized entrance area, and it will be main access for the site. The proposed addition on the right-hand side is over a little fire pond that's been there for some, well, probably 40 or 50 years now. We are going to dredge that. We just finished doing some sampling last Friday for the sediments and to see if we have a beneficial reuse. And conservation is going to be reviewing that. There's been a notice of intent filed on that for that particular project. Request from the fire department on this for fire protection. Although the entire site will have individual buildings having fire pumps and suppression systems in them for modern fire protection. The existing Conti dormitory is where most of the activities begin. When laborers are there, they park in the parking area around the back. There's additional parking throughout the site at various locations. And I'll get to that in a little bit more detail as we get to the new buildings. But as I indicated, there is no increase in population. And that's driven by the fact that there's a septic system on site for all these buildings. And it's a common septic system. We will pump to it from each building. It's been installed, approved by the Board of Health and Conservation Commission. We also have a new well that's gone out in the back behind Laurel Canyon, and that will replace the individual wells that are servicing the existing buildings that are there. Those wells and the proximity to the individual septic systems on the site at each building created a problem with DEP now in nitrogen sensitive areas. So those wells will be decommissioned and only be used for irrigation. They have a fairly extensive planting program and landscape on the site if you've ever been there. And basically the landscaping will be replicated wherever we do any work, especially in the front, and there'll be some additional trees for screening for that patio area. There will be some improvements to the drainage system that exists in that multi-dormitory parking lot. We're going to have some storm scepters to address some of the stormwater applications that have more prominent and regulatory. I'd like to go on to the middle building now, headquarters building that's near the Hoya building. So the pond there is in blue, and we have the Arthur E. Hoya Conference Room building. That's both administrative and a large conference area overlooking the pond. We have had a informal meeting with residents in the area back a couple of years ago to discuss this project and introduce it, and we held it there. It was probably February 2 years ago. The proposed headquarters building is a building that will serve where classroom instruction will take place, and there'll be an amphitheater. John Racine, our architect, has some drawings that or renderings that it will present in a little while. But basically, that building is a building that will allow them to have more formalized offices for teachers and rooms for their bookwork and their reporting requirements to understand how they make reports on hazardous waste conditions, on confined space, on gas and manholes and things of that nature. That particular building is sitting so it kind of overlooks the pond. It's a beautiful pond in that area. We have run utilities along underneath the bridge culvert that connects wetlands to the bottom of the plan, the pond in the middle of the plan. And that work was all done under the auspices of conservation with notices of intent. The headquarters building now has a large infiltration basin under the parking lot, and we are infiltrating increases in runoff, and the soils in the whole site are generally a very good gravel outwash deposit. And we've had many tests throughout the area to demonstrate how that all works. The existing driveway system gets a little bit changed around the Koya and the headquarters building, but the existing driveway system, it came through about the corner of the building, and then it is now being more formalized in that 90-degree type angle pavement that you see coming in and going behind it. The existing driveways throughout the site from East Street in all the way back to the Maloney building are paved. And then there's a loop coming around the pond that's a gravel driveway and connects in just to where the gray shows on the bottom of the drawing where the pond has. Other than that, the entire site has paved driveways. I'd like to go to the crane building now nearby. Crane building, it's a building that's a very high ceiling building, and it will have a dirt floor inside. The dirt floor will allow them to do excavation and set manholes and set up staging and things of that nature with a crane inside that building during inclement weather and winter conditions. As noted, the pavement goes all around there and it connects to Laurel Canyon, although the laborers do not use Laurel Canyon as an access. As I indicated in the beginning, their main access is from East Street, the formal entrance. And Laurel Canyon is a subdivision road where the laborers had bought part of the land abutting that. Now, just off to the top of that, you'll see the IWPA of 617 feet. From the edge of the IWPA into the woods, 600 feet, is our water supply that had been approved by DEP. It had been drilled, and it's being utilized for the entire campus for a community water supply system. The area where the crane building is a former gravel removal operation. Many, many years ago, we chose that because it was open and it was fairly low on the site so that we keep the building, which is a high building, under zoning mentioned, low on the building and not intrusive to the neighbors on Laurel Canyon or surrounding the site, although you can't see it from North Mill Street, which is off to the lower left, and the area is all heavily treed beyond that. Up where the well is shown just off to the lower portion of Laurel Canyon is an open area. It's down below, lower right there. That's an open area where they've been training, making concrete forms and things of that nature. And typically that's open gravel pit area. But again, you can see the contours kind of keeping it a little bit low on the ground. In behind the crane building, we have those heavy duty lines all beside each other, parallel. That's the new septic system, the entire site. It is fed by various force mains coming from the different buildings, and that provides the waste disposal for the entire site. Again, away from the existing buildings where they had their individual wells and septic in close proximity. Now, in the front of the crane building towards the pond, you'll see those kind of hatched area with little kind of dot things. That is part of a field, and that is going to become improved river habitat. We had some impact in that area because of the detention basin. It had been a previously disturbed area. Conservation has approved it, and those little dotted areas are going to become a wildflower meadow. And then, of course, the detention basin will have detention basin plantings as scheduled with the Conservation Commission, all natural rehabilitation for that area. Did have quite a few exotic invasives, basically the winged euonymus along there. We have torn those out and they will not be reproduced. So we have John Racine on, and he has some fairly good pictures of the buildings if he would want to go to that. Or I can answer questions and we can go to him after, your choice.
Let's, I think it'd be great to see some of those renderings possible. I think that kind of helps characterize it, and I suspect other people would be interested to see that as well.
Take it away, John.
John, we can see it, but you're muted. I don't know if George is going to talk through these, or
I would prefer John. I can give it a shot if he can't get on.
John, are you? John Gelsich, can you unmute RGB Architects?
So I can't unmute anybody, but I can request that he unmute.
There we go. Hi, John.
Okay now? Sorry. Thank you for having me. If everyone can hear me now.
We can.
My name is John Racine. I'm a principal with RGB Architects. We're excited to move this project forward. We've been working hard on it for some time now. And I really hope you like the project. So without further ado, this is, I'm going to speak to 3 of the buildings, obviously, that George summarized. The Conti building, which is the dormitory headquarters, which houses operations or administration and classrooms, and the crane/training building. And you'll see that term is kind of interchangeable as we go through. The Conti building is going to be an extension of the existing. So the existing footprint is here. One more time as we go around. And we'll be putting a 2-story dormitory residence addition to it here in the corner. And we're going to expand the dining area, primarily for COVID and other reasons, to give more room in this area. And we're going to expand the kitchen while doing that. So it kind of servery pushes into the existing space, which then pushes into the residential or the dining area. This is the second floor where we are adding the second floor dormitory, and then the second floor main building remains the same. We plan to do renovations, primarily finishes and mechanical upgrades, bringing in a new boiler and new heating units in the rooms. Third floor remains the same, similar to the second floor, where new finishes, carpet, wallpaper, ceilings and things of that nature, and new heating units in the rooms. And that's very similar to the fourth floor. So the majority of the, obviously the 2 additions are at the lower level and second floor, and we're doing renovations and finish work on the upper floors. So here's an image, a quick image of the northeast corner as you're entering from East Street. This is without the trees in the way, obviously. We want to take a good look at the building. The addition here is at least 60 feet, I think a little bit beyond 60 feet from the street. We have a light stone veneer at the bottom, and we have a wood look high pressure laminate at the upper portion here on the second floor that cantilevers over. We have commercial grade aluminum windows, and we have an aluminum composite material making up the siding of the new stairwell here at the end. The existing brick remains, gets cleaned, and any repointing and things of that nature. Same with the 4-story tower here, or the 4-story portion. We do clad the existing elevator in a metal aluminum composite material, as well as we're going to put a veneer of stone on the existing gym, just to kind of modernize it and bring the elements together. There is also a new entrance piece, which is a little bit taller than what's there now. The footprint remains the same. It's the same size as the existing canopy there. We're just enclosing it essentially. Here's a quick image of the courtyard. As I was saying, this is the new stair tower. We've got the wood look, high pressure laminate here. We're not quite sure what the statue will be, but we'll have a kind of a centerpiece in the middle of the courtyard. And this is the new entrance that we'll be putting in. We plan to put a paver on the exterior to bring it to the entrance, and that lead from the existing parking lot. Here's another image, a little closer. Here's a night image of the courtyard. Again, subtle lighting. We didn't want to make this a beacon, but it kind of gives it more of a college feel, more of a quad feel here in the courtyard. And here's an image of the interior. Hotel-like. These are the students will be here for about a week for their classes. So we figure it's kind of a hotel feel to the inside. And then we have a dormitory. There's an athletic center that we're going to, a mezzanine structure that we're going to put inside the existing gym. Right now they have a pretty tough area where they work out now. So this should be quite an improvement.
Nice.
So any questions on the dormitory at this point?
Let's hold off on questions, and I just want to be conscious of time, but I want to make sure we get through the review of the other buildings.
Okay, I'll speed it up a little bit then.
We will have questions though, but maybe not specifically tonight.
Okay. Headquarters is made primarily, this is the first floor. This is a large classroom that can be divided with a movable partition. This area here is a auditorium space, lecture hall. It's got stadium style seating. We have an atrium space that enters into the building that could also use as a function for the students and things of that nature, presentation space. We have a small little cafe where they can, they have vending machines and a coffee machine, some counters to eat for lunch. And these are administrative spaces where the teachers and administration is housed. They do have a couple of different programs. So it's divided into those programs, and there's a conference room from there. In that area. The second floor, this is double height space where the atrium is. This is their administrative portion that is more broad for the program over the entire state. That's why we call it headquarters. But there's some administrative spaces and a couple of executive offices. And file room and things of that nature, and a boardroom. The exterior is a If you notice, it has similar characteristics to some of the elements that we had in the dormitory. We tried to keep a language throughout this, throughout the campus, bringing it a little more modern, but also try to bring some of the natural materials into play. Even though this is not a natural wood, it is a high pressure commercial style, high pressure laminate siding. It is very wood-like and real, but it has a much longer warranty and much less maintenance, which is something that in commercial property we look for. We have a large section of glazing here and an extremely long cantilever, and that was by design. The cantilever provides shading during the summer to lower the light index and the cooling that goes into the building. And then in the winter, it's designed such that the angle of the sun will allow for good interior light, indoor light, natural light, as well as some solar heat gain within the space. That was part of the design effort. Called the backside. This is the side that overlooks part of the pond as well as the existing Koya building. We're kind of creating a green quad here. There's an exterior space off of the small cafe or the small eating area that we had. The atrium comes out and leads to this area as well. And we have an upper level balcony off the boardroom that creates kind of certainly is a college feel is what we're looking for, and a nice place to be. This is another angle looking at it as the grade kind of drops. There may be needs for a retaining wall. We think we can allow the grade to slowly meander down. So we may not need the retaining walls at this point, but we're looking into that as final grades come through. This is a shot of the atrium on the inside. Again, we're trying to represent a college level experience. Terrazzo flooring and exposed structure, and as much natural light as we can possibly get into the space. This is the small lecture hall. It's about, well, it's actually not that small. It's 75 seats. So this is where they'll hold their training classes prior to going to the training building or the crane building, and actually put that learning to work. Actually put it to use. And the training building is very much like George described. This area here is primarily a special mix sand and gravel material that's used. It has properties that allows it to excavate well and maintain its shape. So that will be primarily where they can bring you equipment in, or they can set up staging. They can pour slabs and things during the off season, which is primarily during the winter, and they can exercise and train those experiences here in the building. There is a perimeter concrete slab that goes around this, basically as a sidewalk, and we have a large classroom here that can be divided into two smaller classrooms, a larger classroom in this space here, some basic facilities and storage for their equipment that they use. And then on the upper level, there's a mezzanine space with a couple of offices basically that sits here that overlooks the training bay. That's for the actual instructors that work in this building. The exterior is this portion of the building, the extra height, is a prefab manufactured building, pre-manufactured building. Steel structure, has an insulated panel And then this will be a brick veneer to tie in the rest of the campus where there's brick and metal that kind of brings this whole campus together. The classroom wing is a stick-built steel frame with the main entrance being here at the corner. It's been eroded. And then the little mezzanine space is up here that overlooks the bay on top. We'll have 3 large commercial grade overhead doors that go into the space, and there's one on the back side to allow for through traffic. And that is 3 buildings in a nutshell, essentially.
Thanks, John. And I just quickly, my perspective, I'm super excited to see the investment being made into the site, and looks to be like some really, really nice upgrades and improvements. And you know, this is an important segment of the workforce. So I said, just my personal opinion, I'm very, very excited to see this investment and very appreciative of it. So we're almost up on time, but 2 things really quickly I want to get through. One, I've driven and ridden my bike past the site a number of times. I've never actually been on it, and I think in general, these types of projects, we do like to do a site walk, and we typically do those on Saturday mornings. But would you be willing to host a site walk for us?
Yes, I can do that. I live nearby, and I'll be happy to take you through the site anytime, even 2 or 3 different groups if you'd want.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll try and limit it to 1 just to be moderately efficient. But is Saturday morning, would that work okay for you?
Yes, it would.
Okay, and let's see. Just question of the planning board. Is there? As we look
I have a
at
conflict with the 12.
Okay. So
I'm out for this weekend and next weekend.
You're out the next 2 weekends. Okay.
Is the 19th a possibility?
Yes, for me.
No, not no for me. The kids, school is out for the next 2 weekends. 19th and the 26th, we'll be out of town for kids' school break.
Let me just ask, because I think, you know, realistically, our next meeting is actually a week from now. And I think we've got some bandwidth. I'd love to continue this discussion. If we were to hold the site walk this coming Saturday morning, who would that not work for? I know it wouldn't work for Fran.
May I just say something?
Yes.
Again, I live nearby, and I don't mind doing another walk or 2 early in the morning or late in the afternoon during the week for some people who can't make it on Saturday.
Okay, thank you, George. I will say we do need to. Do we need to post the sidewalk, John? I don't remember. No, we don't. Okay. All right. So let's
I will just caution, we don't have to post a site walk as long as nobody discusses things that we would discuss here.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's go ahead and plan for this Saturday. Sundar, do you have tennis on Saturday? Do we need to work around that?
No, I moved indoors to play badminton, so nobody's there.
Okay. Is 9 a.m. okay for folks?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
And Gary, maybe just a suggestion. Let's do this Saturday, and then maybe we could do like the gentleman suggested, a follow up for folks like Fran who can't make it.
Yeah. Yep.
That'd be great. Thank
Just
you.
have John email me who wants to meet whenever. I'll make myself available.
Okay. And I will say that these sidewalks are open to the public as well. Again, we want to make sure that we're not discussing things. It's not a hearing, and it's all off the record. So it's really just meant as observational for those of us that haven't been to the site to kind of visualize what it is. George, is there a particular place we should park?
There's plenty of parking.
Plenty of parking. Okay, so
I
we'll see
would
the crowd.
suggest that you drive in the main entrance and park right near the back of the dormitory building. There's
Yeah,
plenty of parking spaces right off 37 East.
So the dormitory building is here.
Yeah,
There's a large parking lot
right there.
right there that should accommodate whoever would like to come.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank
So
you.
if we come in, it's on the right side?
Yeah, it's hard to miss
Yes.
as you're coming in
Okay.
off of East Street. It's right. Just keep driving straight.
Thank you.
Dave, you'll recognize the dormitory building. That's the first, that's really the primary building you'll see from the street.
Yeah, it's the only one you see from the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, I drove by it a long time ago, but it's been a long time.
Okay. All
But
right,
I just
so
want
we'll
to echo
schedule
what Gary,
that.
yeah,
What's
so I
that?
just wanted to echo what Gary said, that we're really appreciative of the investment into Hopkinton by you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got that. Let's do this because we're about up on time on this. And I actually really quickly, let's just get through the staff report. John, do you want to quickly summarize your observations, comments, and from the other committees in town hall?
Sure. So this is going for 2 permits, a major site plan review because it is impacting more than 5,000 square feet of gross floor area. And it is also going for a stormwater management permit because the collective area being disturbed is over an acre. So those are the 2 permits that are needed. And the criteria for this site plan is that it conforms with the site plan review standards. They're asking for 1 waiver for sidewalks along the entire frontage. That is the only waiver they're asking for. And then the stormwater management permit has a little different criteria where the board must determine whether it is appropriate to grant any waivers, which I don't believe are required, but if they are, I won't even go over that because I don't think they're requesting it, but they need to make sure that the work complies with the stormwater regulations and which also in turn comply with the Mass DEP stormwater regulations. So that's the stormwater permit. Sorry, I'm kind of like going all over the place in my head. That's the stormwater permit requirements. The comments that we've received, not many. DPW, fire, police, all had none, I believe. Board of Health did not really have a comment. They just said that there's no change in the septic requirements, so that doesn't necessitate a new septic design. My comments are that it appears that the modifications will comply with the site plan standards, and most of the changes are internal to the site, so they won't even be seen aside from the dormitory expansion from the street. The applicant and I have discussed on several occasions the landscaping that happens internally. That is a training method for the students. And so they are going to continue to modify the landscaping as it comes up, because that's how they teach these labor students to do landscaping. So there's really no concrete plan in place. But there can be some discussion as to generally what it's going to look like. Again, it's mostly internal, so it's not going to be seen from the street. And then the last comment that I have is the stormwater calculations have been reviewed previously through Concom. So when you look through Beta's letter, there is a second letter that's attached, and that is Beta's letter to the Concom, which goes through all the stormwater information. So Beta is reviewing the current plans to make sure that they conform with their previous review, but there really shouldn't be any change. That's all I have for now.
And John, this has already gone to the design review board as well?
It has. Design review board has recommended that the planning board approve as submitted. They had no comments.
Okay. Ron, I'm gonna hold off on questions quite yet because we're about up on time. I do want to just, if there are members of the public, I want to give them a chance just because they've been waiting patiently. I also just want to say in general, just based on my observations, what we've seen so far, it feels like primary focus or sort of points of discussion for us are number one around the stormwater plan, and then number two, just want to make sure that the changes that are being made are respectful and appropriate for the abutters around there, given how this is zoned, whether it be through screening and lighting and whatnot. I think that's going to be an important point of discussion. So that's just kind of my preliminary observations. I see I'm going to probably mispronounce this, but the Rotas?
Yeah, the Rotises.
Rotises, okay, sorry.
Thanks, Gary. My name is Michael Rotis. I'm here with my wife, Melinda. We live at 22 East Street, which for reference is directly across the street from the main entrance to the dormitory building. So I sent in a letter today to John. I think it's in the folder for all of you to look at separately. And I'm happy to read that now. If I have 3 minutes, I think I can get through it in 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Great. So we want to start out by thanking the planning board for your ongoing work to maintain the quality of life for the residents of Hopkinton while balancing the need for development and economic growth, and for the opportunity to provide input on the proposed project tonight. And before we talk about specific comments on the project, we want to make sure that we thank the folks at the Laborers Training Center for being good neighbors. We've lived here for about 10 years now, and they've been great. We walk around their grounds, we ride our bikes through there. My daughter plays on the swing sets and the basketball courts and the paddleball courts, and it really is a welcoming facility. So we do appreciate that. With that said, though, we do have some comments, but we want to provide them in a constructive way. We don't want to be combative in any way. We just hope that our comments are taken into consideration when we're doing the final plan. Specifically, there's 3 focus areas that we're concerned about. One is the street view and landscaping, and I think you've all mentioned that slightly already. The second is noise pollution, and the third is light pollution. With respect to the first one, the street view and the landscaping, East Street's a scenic road, and we want to make sure that the space between the new dormitory addition and the street is maintained in a proper way that shields and softens the view of that commercial type building from the road if possible. And the renderings don't include any specific landscaping plans, but there are some references to the use of calorie pears. Calorie pears are listed as invasive species in at least 15 states in the US, and we think there are plenty of alternative choices to make that are native or even nice non-native plants that won't be invasive in the environment. So we ask that you consider using anything but the calorie pears. With respect to noise pollution, one of the things that we like most about living on East Street is the quietness, especially at night when we nearly always sleep with the windows open, even in the wintertime. Unfortunately, however, the existing fans on the roof of the dormitory building entrance section hum throughout the night. So we're asking that any new or existing kitchen exhaust and general ventilation fans, air conditioning condensers, large transformers, exterior motors or generators be sound dampened by using noise abatement techniques such as physical shielding to prevent our ability from hearing the humming, especially at night, and that any new or existing fans are put on a preventative maintenance plan to prevent squeaking, thrumming, whistling, and so on. And we also ask that any generator testing occur during normal working hours on weekdays. The third area is light pollution. This is our most important concern. As mentioned earlier, our most significant concern relates to the lighting associated with the existing buildings, parking lots, and any new construction. As you may be aware, East Street is an otherwise dark road with few light pollution sources except for the Laborers Training Center. And to say that the existing nighttime lighting is similar to Gillette Stadium is not an exaggeration. And the lights are kept on all night, every night. To highlight the current impact on us, I can tell you that we don't need night lights in our house at night because the light pollution coming into our home from the current lighting poles located around the back perimeter of the existing dormitory building parking lot, which are extremely bright and point directly outwards and directly into our house. We'd like to request that the dormitory building lighting plan take into account the light pollution impacts of any new exterior lighting, for example, pathway lighting, parking area lighting, entry lighting, as well as committing to turn off the lights which shine beyond the property line at an appropriate time in the evening, thereby allowing us to enjoy the natural darkness. This would also apply to any interior lighting, such as fire egress stairways with windows, lobby and/or classroom lighting, as this is also a current source of nighttime light pollution in the existing building. Again, these lights are on all night, every night, and can be seen from our home. We also request that all existing and any new parking lot lighting be configured so that the lights are pointed downward and that they're turned off at a reasonable hour at night, for example, 9 p.m. And the cliche is that a picture is worth 1,000 words. In the submission that I provided to John, I actually did include some pictures. I don't have the ability to show them on here now. And these are not manipulated in any way. These are just photographs I've taken from my house and from our bedroom and our living room. So with that, again, these comments were provided in writing to the committee, and we appreciate if you take them into consideration when the final plan is developed.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. And I think those are all things, knowing this board, those are all things that we're going to explore further through this hearing process. So appreciate you raising those issues and having some proactive recommendations as well. So
great, thanks, Gary.
And there we go. John is sharing those photos now of the nighttime. All right, so we are up on time. As I mentioned, yes. Hi, Phil. Do you have a quick comment, Phil?
Yeah, yes, quick comment. So we reviewed the project for the Conservation Commission, as was stated. They provided 6 different notice of intents. This submission only included 3 of them. I recommend that the applicant, I don't know if it's going to really change the project all, but for consistency's sake, I would recommend that the applicant provide the other plan sets to the board for their review. One is utilities that connect all the buildings. So some of the work is shown outside of the plans, and there's a fire pond and there's a restoration area. All of these require disturbance, land disturbance, which is in your so it's part of the stormwater permit that they would need to show the limits of their work. So,
okay.
Other than that, the other comments are pretty straightforward. But
okay, thanks, Phil. And for the applicant, we do generally speaking, we tend to rely pretty heavily on the guidance of our of Beta. So I encourage those other notices of intent to be provided as well. I think that could potentially help us move along here.
Sure, we'll get them out tomorrow.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to need to continue this. I think super introduction gives us a chance to process it, and that sidewalk's going to be great on Saturday. But I'm assuming that the applicant would be open to continuing this to our next meeting, which is actually a week from today, on February 7th. Is that amenable?
That's fine.
Okay. So on that note, I will entertain a motion to continue this public hearing to February 7th.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Cedar, we're getting quite a bit of feedback from you. All right, let's go ahead and vote. Mary, how do you vote?
Mary Larson Marlowe, yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Randy Young, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
Shahadul?
Kaiser Manan, yes.
Ron?
Ron Draper, yes.
And Gary Trindle is a yes as well. So thanks, guys. Appreciate the introduction, and George, we'll see you on Saturday, and we'll be back on next Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we've got 2 more things here. One is wanted to review the output from our pedestrian connectivity survey. And then secondly is our continued dialogue on our subdivision design standards. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to quickly walk through this. This is something that we did as part of that is really a means of collecting some data with our pedestrian connectivity work stream. In particular, Dave and Jane were a big part of this. We also got quite a bit of input from some other members of our community. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it as well, but I think there's some really good data here. I'm pretty excited about it. It's provided a few nuggets or insights that I think will be super useful for us as we embark on trying to put together a plan for a little bit better connectivity within Hopkinton. So just some quick background objectives. Number one is to really understand the underlying preferences and needs related to pedestrian or non-vehicular connectivity. I think it's important. We've done sidewalk surveys in the past, and those were really focused on, okay, what street needs a sidewalk? And unfortunately, what happened is whoever put whatever neighborhood got the most votes in got the most votes for sidewalks. And so the idea here was to try to understand sort of how people intend to use sidewalks and trails and whatnot. The goal for this is to provide some basis for a broader Hopkinton pedestrian connectivity plan. We're hopeful that the data from this will help us prioritize some sidewalks or trails investments, and really to help build advocacy for those, not at town meeting this year, but at town meeting in 2023. So it feels like a long ways out, but we all know with this kind of thing, there's a lot of work and public input and whatnot. And for a little bit of background for those that maybe weren't as involved, the last couple of times we've had sidewalk articles at town meeting, they have not passed. So our hope is that by being a little bit more thoughtful and having a better data package to support it, that we'll have a little bit better success. This was a web-based survey. It's posted on the town website. We provided to local news outlets, EHOP, and we had other relevant boards and committees and clubs distribute it. It's a branched survey, so what that means is that not everybody got all the questions. It depended on how you answered certain questions. It might take you to down a different branch than another. So the sample sizes do vary a little bit, but we've got those posted on the slides themselves. And in total, we had 368 respondents, which I think is fantastic, just from a statistical significance. Shadul could probably talk to that more than I could, but in general, we're thrilled that so many people in Hopkinton took time to complete this survey. The last comment I'd make here is that keep in mind this is only a survey, and response rates were generally good. Like all surveys, there's likely some bias in it as well. So this is just one of several data points, but at least thus far, we think there's some good stuff in it. So I'll just hit on these really quickly, and then we'll get into some of the details. But first and foremost, Hopkinton is a very active community, a broad interest in using trails and sidewalks for a multitude of purposes. No surprise here, but more than 85% of respondents believe that more trails and sidewalks would improve both their mental and physical health. Something that I think we're all a little bit more sensitive to now than we were a few years ago. Respondents want to invest in both sidewalks and trails of various surfaces, and we'll get into a little bit more discussion around those surfaces. Respondents have a slight preference for paved surfaces, but generally desire both paved and gravel. Fitness runners, walkers, cyclists prefer to be on trails located away from the street. I thought this was really interesting that, in particular with the runners and walkers, they prefer loops of 2 to 4 miles, which I think is something noteworthy for us to consider. And then for those looking to walk to a business or school of some kind, a good share of them anticipate traveling more than a mile for those purposes. So that's just a kind of a quick snapshot of things that we thought were particularly relevant. One thing I should clarify that I didn't up front is that this is not intended to be specific to the Upper Charles Trail. So I think that some people took this, given a lot of debate and discussion around that this was somehow immediately connected to it. It's not. I think there's some things that could be useful as those discussions carry on, but I just want to make sure people realize that this is looking much broader than just that proposed trail network. So quickly on overall usage, and you'll see the way these are structured. You've just got a kind of a key takeaway across the top, and you'll notice that at the bottom on each of them is the question that was asked. And what you'll see here is, 96% of the respondents would be using, would like to use a trail or a sidewalk for fitness, walking, and running. And you'll see that 75% of them would want to travel to adjoining or adjacent neighborhoods. 69% travel to businesses. 64% would like to bicycle in some capacity. And then 44% of them would have the children to travel to school. I do think it's worth noting that not all of our respondents have school-age children. So even though that's the lowest intended usage, still a simple matter of the fact that 154 people that responded to the survey want to see their kids walking to school, I think is a very favorable indicator. We already talked about this, but a little bit more resolution in that 85% of respondents believe more sidewalk trails would improve physical and mental health. And a couple of things here. We asked them how strongly they agree with the following statements. I avoid exercising on major roads out of concern for my safety. And again, 86% of them either strongly agree or agree with that statement. More sidewalks and trails in Hopkinton would improve my physical health. And you'll see 85% of them either strongly agree or agree with that statement. And then with regards to mental health, we saw a very similar percentage here in terms of total agreement. So I think no surprise here, but people see a lot of benefits to getting outdoors and having some infrastructure to support that. With regards to investments, we asked them again how strongly they agree with the following statements. Hopkinton provides better connectivity than our neighboring towns. And you'll see it's reasonably split, a little bit more weighting towards the disagree or strongly agree, a heavy percentage of neither agree nor disagree. So I think some balance there. I think a lot of people do think of Milford and Holliston as having really, really nice trails that they've used. And probably some other towns as well. This question of I would prefer to invest town resources into sidewalks versus trails. You'll see here there's a very balanced split. Some people might believe that question is biased in some degree, but you have the choice of disagreeing over here in the purple or agreeing in the blue, and you'll see a very, very even split between those that agree, those that are neutral, and those that disagree. And I think that's generally supported in most of the open field comments as well. As we look at path surface preference, you'll see here we asked them what is your, and this is where the sample size varies a little bit, but we asked them what their preferred walking and running surface was. Highly preferred, no preference, avoid, or highly avoid. So of those fitness runners and walkers, you see their highest preference is for a paved path off the road, but really, pretty open to anything, whether it be a sidewalk, a paved path, a gravel cart path, or single track. All of those have reasonably high desirability for those fitness walkers and runners. Traveling to neighborhoods, and I think in the next three of these, that's where you start to see some preference for paved sidewalks or paved paths. And I think the idea is that for people that are looking to use use this as a means of transit. There's a little bit more comfort for those paved surfaces compared to the unpaved surfaces that you might have with either a cart path or single track or something like that. And then in blue here, you have the rural roads and main roads. And, you know, in general, you see those are a much, you know, in general, people are much less likely to want to use those surfaces or those types of those, I don't know what to call surfaces, roads, I guess, in order for each of these purposes. I'm going to pause there because I've just been talking a lot, and what the next couple of slides are specific to each of these different uses. But any questions, comments from what you've seen thus far?
Through the chair, the findings are fascinating, not surprising, but fascinating, because the whole point about mental health and physical health and people saying that, yes, give me more and I'll do it. That is an amazing, I mean, it's not a surprising insight. We do live in Hopkinton, start of the Boston Marathon and all. So, but regardless, the fact that people verbalize that, and I'm so glad that you did ask that question. So definitely a good input into this entire process.
Through the chair.
Mary, go ahead.
Hi. I know I said this via email, but this the data is presented really, really well. And whomever was responsible for that, yourself, the committee, the John and the staff there, it's fabulous. It's very clear and helps guide the conclusions without biasing it, I believe. I just one point when you were going through the paved versus not paved paths and things like that, I think that preference for paved, particularly for uses of going from one neighborhood to another, going to school, etc., reflects the year-round usage and the ability to tend it during snowfall and so on. So I think that's that's something that is appropriate, in our climate. So that's just something we need to keep in mind, that people are automatically assuming that things that are a gravel or crushed stone path or something like that is not going to be useful during the winter. So it may or may not be, but.
I think that's a great hypothesis, Mary. So I would agree. And was there another comment?
Through the chair, Gary.
Yes.
I would echo the same. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of good work done, good data, and very well thought out, pretty broad, and I think carries a lot of weight from various aspects. Great insight. So thank you, and to all the good people who are behind it and done a very good job. I think this would be a great input to what the overall intent that you mentioned, which is to build our strategy and recommendation and probably plan. We're going to go around building our sidewalks, our trails for convenience, as well as for health and other entertainment reasons. One thing I was wondering, maybe you're going to cover it in the next few slides, is how do we structure our path towards it from this survey? And is there anything we are gonna gear towards for this upcoming town meeting, or you are thinking, or we are kind of collectively thinking that we would kind of progress on this path for targeting the next town meeting with certain recommendations?
Yeah, so great questions. And I do have a slide at the end that speaks to what we've kind of mapped out for next steps. To some degree, collecting this data is the easy part. Actually doing something with it and getting agreement and collaborating and working across that is the hard part. But we've got some steps outlined. Realistically, I don't think we would have anything for this town meeting, and I'm pretty confident in that. Just given article requirements, and I think that if we were to move something forward for this town meeting, I don't think it would be fully vetted to a point where we would be successful with it. And we've all sort of seen what happens when things get are half baked, they get put in front of town meeting, and particularly on something that has a potential to impact a lot of people. So just given funding requirements and other things, I will say that we are exploring some potential grants that would not be through town meeting that might be able to help with this, but no plans for town meeting right now for this year.
Makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that. And it would be probably good to think about how to evangelize it further and maybe take advantage of the town meeting for that.
Yep, absolutely. Ron?
Thank you. Again, I don't want to reiterate what people said. Fantastico. It's good, so I'll just be very quick. My concern is the slide prior to this one, where it's approximately 33 want paved, 33 unpaved, meaning that we're going to have to be very careful not to displease half the population. So no matter what, if we're going to put forth some proposals, it will probably be best to consider a mixture of gravel and sidewalks versus trails, because otherwise we're not listening to the constituents. But I think it's a fantastic data set. That's all, but hopefully we can do something with it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ron. All right. Oh, Fran?
Yeah, just one final comment, Gary, is I like the way that this has been structured, and I've seen it done in the past where people have just, it's been kind of a straw poll where most folks wins. What I'd like to see with this is potentially, and this is actually with staff, kind of institutionalize this. This becomes a baseline for, maybe you do this again in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, some window to get a sense in terms of how the community kind of sees this, and does the community evolve with their thinking in any of the different areas. Maybe it's the same over time, but I do think it's a pretty cool barometer. And, for this board and other boards to kind of gauge the sentiment of how people are feeling about sidewalks and gravel paths and whatnot. So I do like this format very much, and I commend everyone who's thought this through. As others have commented, I thought it was well done, and kudos.
I think that's a great suggestion, Fran. And without having a point of comparison, it's hard to know how meaningful this is. And what you just described is a good way to do that. So I'm gonna keep moving forward because I do want to make sure we wrap up at 10 o'clock, and we've got one more item to discuss. But I'm gonna hit on these pretty quickly and a little bit more resolution by each of those categories. So we look at those fitness runners and walkers. A couple things that I find that we found really interesting here. One is, a lot of frequency. I mean, roughly 2/3 of them are running and walking at least 3 times a week. So that was the highest frequency that we saw across all uses. And I already mentioned it, but the idea of, they're typically looking for something in that 2 to 4 mile range. I also think it's interesting because we went into this exercise thinking that maybe we should be running a sidewalk down Wood Street to connect the Whitehall area with downtown. And from what this data tells us is that that's too far of a distance, and it's not going to get a whole lot of use. And we think we'd be better off focusing on these in particular for this use for these fitness walkers and runners, to focus on this 2 to 4 mile loop distance as a kind of a good guiding philosophy for building out trails and sidewalks. You'll see a little bit more resolution here on preferred path type, and these numbers are represented in the previous chart, but you just see a little bit more resolution on the highly preferred versus the preferred and the services to avoid. So we look at traveling to other neighborhoods, and again, you'll see you'll see a little less frequency, but still a desire to do this quite a bit. As I mentioned, a broader range, or maybe not a broader range, but different metrics here, but longer distances that they're willing to, I guess not longer distances, excuse me, but a range of a quarter mile to call it 3/4 of a mile account for almost 70% of the anticipated usage there. And then you'll start to see that stronger preference for sidewalks and paved paths away from the road. Traveling to businesses, we see less frequency here. Almost 3/4 of them would be once or fewer per week. So I think it's important. These probably aren't commuters, but they're people that want to walk to a restaurant, to a yogurt shop, to the hardware store, whatever that might be. But this is where you start to see more weighting towards those longer distances. And I think that probably is some inverse correlation to the frequency per week. They're not doing it every day, so they're willing to go a longer distance. And again, continued preference for that sidewalk or paved path away from the road. Traveling to school. And I think that the biggest surprise to me here was that seemed to be a pretty strong appetite to travel more than a mile. Certainly less frequency than some of those other uses, but I think this is worth keeping in mind, even as we look at areas of investment for sidewalks, that it's not just within a quarter mile or a half mile that people actually do travel and are willing to travel a longer distance than one might expect. And then cycling a little bit different here, but you get a sense of typical distance. Majority of respondents, or almost majority of respondents, are in that 3 to 10 mile range. And we saw a predominant preference for a paved path away from the road. I think people think of the Milford Bike Trail as a very typical instance. Again, I think there's some usefulness here as we think about how to help and encourage people to bicycle more and help them feel more comfortable and safe in doing so. We did ask an open question for other comments, and I kind of lumped these into two categories. One was general comments, and you'll see themes of safety really rise to the top here. Some conversation of prioritize trails and sidewalks are important. Don't pave existing trails. Maintains the one we have. So some general comments for folks, and then we had a lot of suggested areas or things that people were looking for. Whether it be connect to the Milford Trail, don't run along the Hayden Row, Lumber Street, Cedar Street, connecting Ash to Chestnut, finish the sidewalk to Ashland, EMC to Blueberry Lane, that's EMC Park, Spring Street, West Hopkinton, and Lake Maspinock. So just some ideas. Like I said, this is not statistically relevant, but these are just kind of aggregating all those comments into a couple of different themes here. Hang on one second, Ron, and I'll get to you. So these are the recommendations that we have started to socialize. I'd love to get some input here from the board. One of those is to focus on trail loops of, call it 2 to 4, 2 to 5 miles for runners and walkers. And I think it's important to the notes earlier. This can be any combination of services. One thing that's great about this subset is that, Fran, I'm looking at you as probably someone that's run more miles in Hopkinton than all of us. It doesn't necessarily matter too much to this group as to what surface it is, as long as they're not having to run in the street. The second recommendation here is, particularly in the areas that stem out from downtown and around schools, that's where there's the biggest benefit to having some paved infrastructure, whether that be sidewalks or paths. Given the anticipated usage of those areas and the desire for those, that very well likely makes sense. On trails, what we put here is that trails should have varied pavement. And to Ron's earlier points, there's benefits to each. People like a mix. One of the things that one of the potential suggestions here is to recommend a paved spine path. And again, this is not considering cost, and I realize there's a lot of cost considerations. But if that primary spine is paved and then having dirt and gravel secondary trails, then that's a way to bring some balance and economy to it. Again, people like all sorts of different trails. We shouldn't just say we should only have one. And then the last idea here related to cycling was this idea of mapping out a Hopkinton bike route or a loop. And then post signs along that identify that as a bike route. That not only serves to inform drivers, but also informs cyclists and help them identify optimized routes. It also means that the DPW, as they repave or make improvements or stripe or whatnot, that they can take into more consideration the potential for cyclists in those areas. And there's some really simple things that people don't always realize, but one thing, for example, is to if you're going up a hill, is to shift the center line over so that there's more shoulder on the uphill than the downhill. And cyclists that are riding on the road typically go pretty fast going downhill, so they don't need as much shoulder. Going uphill, they're more likely to get past, and having a little bit of extra space is sometimes a benefit. So that's something that if we were to mark that out and put signage up, it could improve safety. It helps steer people towards roads that are maybe a little bit more safe. And in time, we can make some improvements that further improve safety. And then this was just some initial notes on next steps. But to some of the points earlier, I think there's an opportunity to do some readouts with other boards and committees. We have a lot of them that have interest in this, and we wanted to share it with the planning board first, but it's something that's on my list to get in front of the Trails Committee, the Upper Charles Trails Committee, the Trails Club, probably HALT, possibly Open Space. Then what we'd like to do is through a small working group is to take this data and start to prioritize some focus areas. So this is where we start to get a little bit more specific. Fortunately, compliments to Steve Lewandowski, I have and John Gelsich, I have a really nice D-size printout of Hopkinton with maps and sidewalks outlined on it, which I think will be a great starting point for this. But sometime in the spring, small group, our work stream with Jane and with Dave and likely a few others, and start to come up with some very specific recommendations. The third step is, we definitely want to have a public input session once we've got some recommendations and something more specific to react to. And then the last piece of that is developing some more formal proposals for where we think investment would be warranted. So I'm going to stop there. You've all got the slides, and certainly can entertain individual questions at a later point in time. But Ron, I see your hand raised. So
Gary, if I might, can we just go to Jane and myself before we go to the general planning board?
Sure.
Please.
Perfect.
Yep. Thank you. I just wanted to make one comment. So, and great. Yeah, obviously, Gary, great for doing. I know you had a large handing all this, but thank you for doing that. But Jane, just want to make a point that Jane, yourself, and I, we just really touched really quickly on this last page, and we didn't really have a chance to vet it out very well, because I know at the end of our last meeting, Jane and I were making a point about a recommendation for safety, about trying to incorporate some kind of recommendation for streets where people are walking a lot in the street that are dangerous. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yep. Thank you. And by all means, that's why this says preliminary. And I do want to collect other ideas, and if there's ways we can enhance this. And I think that's a good one, that even through some signage, and I know Jane's got some thoughts as well, and some other ways that we can improve safety.
Great, thanks.
Jane?
Sure. So just very quickly, Gary, you did a great job pulling all of our thoughts together and putting this in a format that is so clear and is a great jumping off point for further discussion. And I like the next steps, how we're going to take our time and gather more data and more information. I just also would like to reiterate that what I thought was interesting is that people feel that there's room for both types of trails, all types of trails. And I thought that that was encouraging, and it shows how much our town supports the variety.
Thanks, Jane. Ron.
Thank you. So these are just, I'll keep it quick and brief. So I'm going to preface this. I am no means an avid runner. I do jog every now and then, or an avid biker, but I do bike every now and then. So if we were to think about a bike trail, I think we're also going to have to consider corresponding parking, because that's where all these bike trails usually have a parking. And again, that's going to have to assist in the cost of the event. And secondly, when it comes to the running, I think it's a different paradigm, because from my understanding, and please, this is just my opinion, when people go for their 2 to 3 times a week jog, they don't get in the car and drive somewhere. They typically jog in their neighborhood, because they usually do that for exercise. They come back sweaty. So I think it's a different type of mindset when you're looking at whatever slide number this is, where 2 to 3 times a week or 3 to 4 times a week, the needs are different when you're talking about trails for biking versus running for jogging and exercise on a fitness exercise everyday basis type thing.
Yep.
That's all.
Yeah, Ron, I think those are great points, and I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to kind of understand how those behaviors are different, because you know, there's certainly different design considerations as we look at those different uses that are worth thinking about.
Yeah, one's community and one's just resident, non-community. It's more of a nature.
Yep. Yeah. Other questions, comments, recommendations? How do you guys feel about these? I added one in here: improved safety features on highly traveled roads.
Gary, if I may, can you just add a little onto that? Say highly traveled roads, comma, highly pedestrian use, high pedestrian use. Because like to your point, like on 135, that section, it's highly traveled road for cars, but there's not a benefit to that, right? Thank you.
All right, so stay tuned for more. Dave and Jane, I know, I guess 2 asks for you is if you can, I'd love to come in and share this output with the committees that you lead and serve on. You know, I think that's a really important piece of this. And then, you know, as we get through that, let's get something scheduled for a working group to start translating this into some specifics that we can work towards.
Sure, I think we can do that offline.
Yes, perfect.
Great.
Through the chair, one quick comment on this. I was wondering, do we have all the data also that DPW may have collected in the past or have on the current various types of trails and sidewalks and whatnot? That could be a good input. And then at some point, as part of the next steps, it might be also worth talking to them and getting their input or their engineers' input into this from a technical and from their kind of real world services that they provide. What are their thoughts into this?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I know that Mr. Westerly has a lot of interest in this as well. So John, it's probably worth us doing some type of readout or sharing with his team. I will say, Shahidul, I don't know how much data there is. The sidewalk surveys that have been done before that are really just targeting specific streets. You know, I know we did one at the start of the pandemic. We have that. I'm not sure what else is out there, but I personally, I think to the points already mentioned, I found it hard to get much use out of those because we just, we're really kind of people identifying streets in the neighborhood, which I don't think was overly useful.
I think we're doing that work now.
Yeah.
Other data.
Yeah.
Whatever historical data is done. Yeah, I remember. I mean, I can go back 8 or 9 years, and Ken Weismantel did the survey. So I mean, there might be meeting minutes, from that time where they actually talked. And I think, Gary, what you find is if there's 10 to 15 suggestions, it is literally who got the most tick marks.
Yeah.
By it, and it was prioritized that way. So I don't think you're gonna get a whole lot from it other than an interesting data point.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, this is certainly a very comprehensive and has a lot of good data points. So.
Night and day, what we have here.
All right, so I know it's getting late, but I do want to have a quick discussion about our subdivision design standards. Show of hands, who went out and looked at another neighborhood? 3 of us? No one else? Okay.
No, not physically, but I looked online.
Okay.
Does that count?
That's helpful. You get half a star for that.
Okay.
Fran and Ronnie get full stars, but you get a half a star. I think, and I guess what I want to be sensitive of time here, but maybe really quickly, those of us that did a little bit of homework here can provide some comments on what they liked or what they didn't like about a particular neighborhood. And then I have a proposal. I guess that's number one. Number two is a quick, just sort of get people's input on portions of the subdivision design standards that we want to focus on. And then I have a proposal for how we can move forward with this. So that's a lot in 14 minutes. But Fran, why don't you share your perspective first? So what neighborhood did you go look at? And
I went to the Riverwalk in Concord, and it was awesome. I mean, I literally, if I could move there, I would want to move in one of those units.
Did you look at what the houses cost?
I did not see the pricing of those houses. They're not Concord. There's nothing cheap in Concord. But I will tell you, the design, the layout, the geography. Boy, if we could replicate something in that type of construct here in Hopkinton, I think the demand would far exceed the supply. You'd have to find the right place for it, but the units were, again, this isn't for somebody who's got 4 or 5 children, right? These are smaller units, condensed, walkable between the units. There's open space. They're very attractive. It seems like the design company, they're based out of Providence, has put some thought into this. They've done a few of other properties in the area, and they look great.
So Fran, if you could pinpoint 3 specific things that you really liked about it, what would those 3 things be?
Yeah, I think not the inside of the house, but the exterior design fit in with the landscape very well. The second thing is the condensed nature of the units, but yet there was walking space between them, and it was accentuated by some open space areas, and I don't call it a park, but kind of a common space area that was just well appointed, and it backed up into open space. Right, that was the second. And the third, I thought, was just the ease of the accessibility within the unit. So, within the development, not so much the unit.
Ronnie, I'm going to jump in here because I also went and looked at Riverwalk and the neighborhood they're building right next to it. And just to provide a little bit more perspective for folks, this is it's 14 units. The units range in size from, I think, 800 to 1,300 square feet. it's focused on what I would describe as kind of that community element. There's kind of a meandering path that goes down the middle, that's pedestrian only. It's got common parking areas elsewhere. And the best way that I would describe what I liked about it, I really liked the focus on walkability and community, and like, you know, they had things like a public garden of sorts, but you know, just in general, it was maybe a little too condensed for me. But just that if I were to sort of uncouple the actual density of it to the benefit of it, you know, is that means of connecting people with their neighbors in some capacity. I love the idea of having garages in the back instead of garages in the front, and what that does in terms of a traditional neighborhood design to instill community. I thought there was a really nice investment in hardscape and landscape that I think kind of raised the bar of what it was. And I thought it was really interesting that everything was sort of scaled down in a sense, and that, you know, the houses were, of course, small, but if there was a second floor, it was kind of a 1.5 story. The landscaping was smaller, and that just kind of maintained a sense of scale. And then the last piece was just mixed architectural forms along the way. Like, it wasn't like completely linear, like everything was lined up. There's kind of some varying forms that created a really cohesive feel to it. So I was really fascinated by it. It was worth a drive to me. I think particularly as we look at the Housing Choice Initiative, I think something like this is a potential, and it's, you know, to me it's an example of a denser housing form that's done well, albeit it's expensive. Concord's expensive, but, you know, I think I saw an 800 square foot unit that was somewhere around $800,000. So you know, yeah, John.
I will just point out it's expensive because there's a demand, and there's a limited supply.
True. So. Very true. Very true. Ron, tell us about your neighborhood.
So I took this as an opportunity to explore just the area, because I'm relatively new to this. I drove through Westboro, Southboro, Northboro, but I just drove streets. And so I didn't look whether or not for housing, I just drove. So surprisingly,
hey, Ronnie, we're getting a bit of an echo. It's hard to understand you.
Thing ran out of batteries. So I'll try not moving. I'll focus. Does this work better?
Yes, I think so.
So after I looked at all these neighborhoods, surprisingly, the one that I was the most pleased with was actually here in Hopkinton. And it basically, and again, as Fran was mentioning about what inspired him. So the three things about this Roosevelt Avenue was, it had sidewalks, every home was unique, and it had that central, word I'm looking for, common area where, you know, I can imagine kids are playing football, frisbees, whatever. It had the community feel while having nice areas for people to walk and feel safe. In this case, we're talking about paved areas for jogging. It had, and it wasn't flat, it had some terrain. There was everything that I would have liked to have in the neighborhood I would want. So, but there were some smaller areas in Milford in particular that had some nice streets. And if you want the street names, I can find it again, but nothing that jumped out that resonated to me as much as that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ronnie. I'm glad you found something like best in Hopkinton.
So I think he's referring to Roosevelt Farms off of Fruit Street, right?
Yep. Mary, tell us about your investigation.
Okay, I just had to find the unmute button. All right, so I too have been looking, and even before this point, at the designs that are online for communities that have that common area, that have the walking, between the homes. not always detached homes. There's sometimes like attached to one another, so more like townhouses or similar to that. I really like, a central grassy area, kind of almost a courtyard feel, with homes around a U shape, that, and I looked online as well at the Concord ones that you just sent out, the River Walk, and they look beautiful there as well. But a lot of the affordable and attainable housing that we were investigating through our subcommittee was along these lines, was along the lines of having the housing fairly close together, having some common lawn area and gathering areas that people could use jointly or on their own, but not everybody having their own huge big yard. And it's not all this stuff is not rocket science new, brand new. We've talked about it before, but those seem to be the really nice ways to go, where it has a central park-like area that has some sort of, I like your mention of, good landscaping and hardscaping, that has some benches, that has, a small playground area, it's all a shared area. It does not have to be exclusive to that neighborhood even. It can be a public park along the main drag in Medway. They put up in the historic, center, where there's a lot of 19th century homes and so on. There's also some new apartment buildings, and then small public parks. So it's, perhaps not done all within the same development, but they're grouped closely together, and it works for everyone, so there's a nicely designed apartment building, so it's housing that's consolidated, and then the parks nearby. And so that's something we should also consider. It's like we've already got our common, which is great. And so, housing that can be clustered around there is good, but there's also potential for other small, not necessarily the size of pocket parks, but that's, it doesn't have to be huge parks. It could be small public parks and playgrounds and so on. And so that's what I like to see, and what I think is a good potential future for providing affordability, potentially. I know supply and demand also always an issue, but we can try.
Thanks, Mary. Any other thoughts on sort of what makes a subdivision desirable and nice? And I'd encourage specificity here. I mean, either if it's an example of a neighborhood you really like, or characteristics that are really important to you.
Through the chair.
Yeah, Rob.
So in various places in Massachusetts and other parts of the country, I think some people touched on amenities like public spaces. Well, a lot of, like, I would say subdivisions, which that are highly desirable, revolve around some aspect that is communal. And usually that's a country club or a club that has tennis and fitness and a pool. Like you see these down the Cape, you see New Seabury, there's other ones down the Cape. They're all over the South, but I just don't know. Like in Hopkinton, there's not the land really for that project readily available. I go back to what makes a subdivision highly desirable and how it could impact Hopkinton. And the big thing is, how do we, at least in my mind, is it comes back to taxes and school age children and school system's going to increase 1,000 kids over the next 10 years. So people want to balance any growth and what we could do to balance that growth versus the impact on taxes going forward. So I don't know how we change the subdivision as we sit here now. I don't know how to change the subdivision regulations. Like I don't know what I'd propose to say, if we did this, we'd have a better community. But I do think more communal type aspects within subdivisions and within the town in general makes for a better town and makes for better neighborhoods.
All right, thanks, Rob. Any other thoughts on this topic? It's getting late, I know. All right, so we're at 10 o'clock. I'm just gonna read off a couple of areas from our subdivision design standards. And I will say, I think, John described this to me, I think, in a good way, and that's that our design standards and our bylaws ideally are written in a way that if somebody puts forward a proposal that doesn't have any waivers and it meets all of our design standards, that should be a very fast approval process. And so, some of the areas that kind of stood out to me, most of these are in section 8, some are in section 9. But curbing is, I think, something worth updating. Dead end streets, we talk a lot about those, and one of the things I just had here is number one, that something around adding on to existing dead end streets. The second one was shared driveways off of dead end streets. I think there's some potential there. Sidewalks, we always talk a lot about sidewalks and moving those sidewalks off of the road. Fire protection and sprinklers in particular, we've heard, and former Chief Slamman was certainly a big proponent of encouraging residential sprinkler systems. Section 8.9, shade trees, vegetation, natural historic features like stone walls and stonescape. What else did I have here? Shared driveway length, shared driveways on dead ends, guardrails, either being brown or wood. But I'm wondering if as people read through the subdivision design standards, if there were other things that stood out to them as areas that we would want to revisit. And I realize that we're not going to solve everything through design standard updates, because things like housing density and some of this stuff are things that are beyond just that. But are there any other areas that, besides those that I read off, that people think is kind of worth an update or a revision?
Gary, I haven't really kind of reviewed those bylaws in depth, but one of the things that stood out to me up in Concord was, and I think you touched on it, is the parking. Right, so you've got parking. Concord had it in such a way that it's kind of not necessarily connected to the front of the house, and I like that because it really focuses more on the house and the communal aspect, and the parking was around back or parking was separate. I can think of different developments here, even the one off of Lumber that kind of connects to Lumber Granite, where the garage is in the front, and a few others around, and it just seems to kind of deaden the sense of community when you just look at someone's garage and they pull in the garage and close the door and they're gone. I don't know. I think that's just an area that would be an interesting topic to read.
Yeah. And there's one thing I heard in common across all of our descriptions was that sort of that shared community asset, and everyone mentioned that. And it's sort of like, how can we share resources to either provide more uses for people, or how can we create these community spaces that reinforce that level of community? I think, to your point, Fran, garages not in front of the house encourage that, and I also would argue that there's probably some benefit to having shared visitor parking areas. I know some of the neighborhoods in Hopkinton do that. Now they have sort of small parking areas or whatnot. But just a way to potentially reduce on-street parking, provide overflow when visitors are there, and that's something that could be a benefit, even if it's not just garages and back, but just having some shared parking areas is one. The other one, before I forget, before John reminds me of it, is in general an overhaul of our stormwater standards. We've all seen in the last year, we've had a lot of systems fail that were designed to conform to our standards, and in some cases, our standards reference some pretty dated measurement and whatnot. So John's actually working on. John, you want to talk really quickly about what you're exploring?
Sure. So for the municipal vulnerability preparedness program, which some of you may be familiar with, my first year, which was what, 3 years ago now, we went for certification for the MVP community status. As part of that, we can submit applications for assistance and grants to evaluate stuff that would be climate change related. So I've submitted an expression of interest for assistance to review the subdivision regs in general, with an eye toward nature-based solutions and flooding issues, really, particularly for the rainfall calculations that we're using. Like Gary said, they're pretty out of date. I think they're from like 95, which is the standard, sadly enough. They're the standard rainfall calculations, but there are some calculations that are out there that are more current. So the effort is really to look to whoever we can get on as a consultant to review these subdivision regs to really identify places where we can improve stormwater management, nature-based solutions for any kind of climate change adaptation, and then other strategies that may work in that same realm of that type of theme.
Thanks, John.
And just to, sorry to interrupt Gary again, I also reached out to the fire department and asked them to provide me with a wish list of changes to the subdivision regs that they would like to see, so that we can vet that. And because they're always, I always tell people when they come in to do some kind of development is talk to the fire department first and see what they want, because the planning board is going to rely heavily on what they want. So might as well address that first. So if they can give us some feedback that we can just insert right into the subdivision regs, that kind of takes a step out of the process.
Thanks, John.
Gary, can I make a quick comment on Fran's comment?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So Fran, that sounds awesome with the garages behind the houses. And I would be totally for that, but I don't think that's something we can obviously encourage it through our opinion, but it's not something we can do through our design standards, right? I can't envision how we can, I was just trying to think how we can encourage that, but
you're right, Dave. I don't think it's anything we can kind of, enforce. It was just more of an observation in terms of the way the developer had done it. And I just thought it lent to a broader sense or a more communal sense for the development. That's what
I think it's good thinking outside the box too. I was just trying to apply it practically and I couldn't.
I know.
Dave, I think like to your point, and the way most of Hopkinton's built out, it really doesn't apply. But I keep going back to this, potential for a denser housing district, in relation to being an MBTA community. And that's where something like this could apply. So, it's not like we're gonna sort of retrofit Highland Park and put garages behind the houses. But if there was something else that came down the pipe, that's there might be some way to incorporate that.
It's funny, I was thinking about, there's really two different types of developments. There's one, like Ronnie said, with the family-based, like off of Fruit Street there, where you have the central common area. But then what Fran was talking about was more like adult-based, more high density, which is almost, to us, that's Legacy Farms, right? So maybe we should look at Legacy Farms and see how we can improve that zoning going forward, because a lot of the stuff Fran's talking about, we can probably could have been incorporated into that.
Yeah, to that point, through the chair, I wonder if you could somehow, incentivize, right? I'm using air quotes around incentivize, but do something that would make it, fortuitous for a developer to incorporate a design that Dave mentions like that. Don't know, right? We're spitballing here after 10 o'clock, so usually nothing sticks anyway, but I do think it's, you know, worthy of some discussion. It'd be kind of neat to be able to have something that proactively, you know, entices a developer to kind of think out of the box, that it makes sense to them financially as well.
John?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you guys are bringing this up because I was going to say something as well that's related to that. And I don't mean to continue this conversation much longer, but we do have the village housing in residential districts and the garden apartments in residential districts. Those are, for lack of a better term, inactive right now because they only turn on when we're below the 10% for affordable housing. So there could be some potential to redesign those districts in terms of a zoning, you know, blanking on the word right now, but redesigning the language within those districts, allowing them to be activated outside of needing affordable housing, where you can do these types of developments that you guys are talking about, because these aren't, you know, the garages in the back are something that you would do in one of these types of developments because you'd require alleyways. You wouldn't do that in a conventional subdivision. Probably wouldn't even do that in an open space subdivision. So the type of development that you would do those types of things in don't really technically exist right now in Hopkinton because you can't build a village housing and residential district development. So that might be something worth looking at if that's a route the board wants.
Gary, going along John's thoughts there, there's very few garden and village housing developments in Hopkinton. I think most of the folks don't even know where they are. So maybe when the weather gets a little nicer, we could do a little site walk of an existing one. Like I think, John, the village one is off of Lumber Street, right? The Muse. I think it's the Patriot Boulevard or whatever.
No, the Muse was done a different way, I believe.
Oh, that's its own, right? So we're like, isn't there something off of Pond Street or something that's a garden?
So Maspinock Woods is a garden apartment.
Right.
I don't know if we even have a village housing development.
Right.
What is Davenport?
Yeah, what's Davenport? That was my question.
Davenport, let's see.
No problem. Hayden Row, down by Cornell.
So Davenport, Hopkinton Highlands, and Maspinock are 3 garden apartments.
Interesting.
Oh, that small section of Highland Park, not the whole development, just that small apartment section.
Mayette Woods, yeah.
Okay, well, just my suggestion is maybe
Trevor Lane.
Maybe we should take a look at site walk at one of those and take a look around. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. All right, so I know we're up on time. My proposal is so I guess 2 things here. You know, some of this can be done through some of the things we've talked about can be done through our subdivision design standards. Some of these are zoning bylaws, and those have very different processes associated with them. What I'd like to do is see if there's a couple of folks that are willing to break into a smaller subgroup here and put forth some very specific recommendations. And you know, the changes to the subdivision design standards, those would require a hearing, but those are things that we can actually vote ourselves. Whereas the bylaw changes, actually, my thought is that we could use this as an input to Zach and give Zach some kind of meaty things to work through as part of this process. So, you know, if we wanted to do an upgrade to or an update to the village housing or the garden apartments, it feels like something that we would want to utilize Zach for. Mary, see your hand raised?
I'm literally raising my hand to volunteer.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Thanks,
I'd like
Mary.
to nominate Randy Young. I think he's got some great experience.
Easy, Dave.
You don't have to volunteer now.
With you.
You don't have to volunteer now, but think about it. And all this will still kind of come back through the planning board. I just think that there's some benefits to using the subgroup approach. Those are kind of my thoughts with some specific recommendations of which we can move forward. So. Great discussion. I wish we could talk about this stuff longer because I think there's a lot of just benefits to getting this stuff out in the open. But I know that it's 10:15. Any closing comments or thoughts before we adjourn?
Yeah, thanks for leading that discussion. That was good.
Yeah, very informative.
All right. Well, on that note, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Dave with the second, Dave with the motion, Jane with the second. Assuming no further discussion, Mary, how do you vote?
Yes.
Rob?
Rob Benson, yes.
Fran?
Fran DeYoung, yes.
Jane?
Jane Moran, yes.
Dave?
Dave Paul, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Subramanian, yes.
Shahadul?
Kaidul Manan, yes.
Ronnie?
Reefer, yes.
And Gary is a yes. Everyone have a good night, and we'll see you next Monday.
1 week.
No, Saturday.
Oh,
Saturday.
Saturday. Yes. Thank you, Jane. We'll see you Saturday at 9 o'clock.
Dress
Okay.
warm.